Hello, everybody, and welcome to another PMP End of Month review. So, we're here. It's the end of another month. It's the new year. Welcome to 2019, and we're going to go ahead and look back at the last month of 2018 at December and the end of month review submissions in the PMP Google Plus hobby community. Why? What is the PMP, you might ask? Well, the PMP is Painters Motivating Painters. It is our Google Plus hobby community focused on helping you take your next step on your hobby journey. So, as always, if you would like to join us on your own personal hobby journey, we'd love to have you. You can find the link down in the description. It's right down there. And just click on that, ask to join. Whether you're just starting out or a master, doesn't matter. We'd still love to have you as long as you're interested in joining a positive, growth-focused hobby community where we all help each other take our next steps. The other thing I always say at the top of this, and I mean, is that I very much enjoy doing these reviews. They're a lot of fun, but we only do these once a month, and people post throughout the month. And so all of you who are commenting, who are answering questions, who are giving feedback every time someone asks, I want you all to know how deeply appreciated that is. You are the real heroes. You are the glue that binds this community together. I absolutely mean that from the bottom of my heart. Nothing makes me more happy than when I click into a link, maybe an hour after I see it come into my email, and with somebody with a question, and there's already 4 people who've answered that question with wonderful explanations. It's amazing to watch, and it's something I truly love. So, with that being said, we're going to jump right into this. We will be reviewing those submissions tagged as end of month review, and we'll be looking to give some feedback to the painters. This month, it's just me here at the beginning. I may be joined a little later on by my compatriots. So you're going to have to put up with just me this month. I apologize. But I promise they'll be back. We had some, it's around this time of the year. It's always a little tough. Obviously, people are very busy. So let's get cracking, shall we? Okay. So lock on myself, and we'll share up here and flip over to our community page. Okay. So we're going to start out with TD McDonald, who gives us the HQ units for his current Drukari team. Okay. And he wants to know, he said he's happy with how they turned out, but he wants to talk about some, just sort of options for next steps. So let's get into them. So I think of the 3, this is my favorite. This guy has a really interesting color schema. We're going to look at these top 2 pictures because I think these give us the best sort of image of it front and back. I like the color scheme very much. It's this very bright, well-defined color scheme. It's not necessarily heeding any realistic light pattern, but that doesn't matter. I think it's more an artistic expression, and I'm okay with that. Hello, Eric. Is that you?
Yeah, that's me.
Hey, buddy. I'll give you the next one. I've kicked us off. So nice. I'll just have you jump into the next one here.
Perfect.
What I like about this scheme is it is simple but very rich. That is to say, we've basically got blue and purple with a little bit of accent green. I think the accent green actually goes a really long way here, with a little pop. I'd love to see maybe 1 or 2 more tiny instances of that pop around somewhere. Like I like it in the runes and up here in this little gem. I think that all looks nice. This guy is absolutely my favorite. I think the cloak variation looks good. A little texture pattern, like some stippling or something on there, might be a good way to go, just to get some actual variation on the backside. But I get what's going on. It's the collection of all these different sort of cloths and texture and different stuff sewn together. So that's cool. I'm not sure about the flesh tone one. I know you saw a face, and so you thought flesh tone, but I still think you could have taken that into the gray tone. This random 1 patch of warm on an otherwise completely cold miniature is very disruptive to me. I feel like it would be stronger if there were, if everything would just stayed cold. So like this skin could just be gray, right? But all in all, on this guy, what I see is just some opportunities for like cleanup and sharpening, like getting some more little highlights on these little pieces here, sharpening out a few edges on the lower part here, just so like something's reflecting, those things are catching light in between the fingers here. It's little minor stuff. I think this guy's really solid. When we look at the second guy here, Mr. Chain Brained, I actually think that the purple robe feels like a missed opportunity. You've got this nice big space. we could do some stuff on there. It could be a texture, it could be a freehand pattern, anything like that I think would be fine. Something like that could be a cool touch. I think I like the brain just fine. I think that looks okay. No issues there. I think the armor looks good. It's a relatively simple miniature overall. So I think really my issue is just like we have kind of this area is all very visually interesting. I like the glowing eyeball and all that kind of stuff. I don't mind any of that. I think that the robe is probably our best opportunity to like add more to it, add more spice. How about that? Okay. This one, the last girl, I don't remember what this is called, but I really like this model. I thought she's really cool, like the commander girl.
Succubus?
Is that what it is?
I think that's the succubus.
All right. Well, let's say it is. I think it's a super sweet model.
Yeah.
My only issue with this is that the hair is exactly the same color as the energy as the gun and the cloak. Now, I'm pretty famous for doing hair in the same color as a lot of cloth and weapons as well, so I get that. My point is just that it's so very bright, whereas when I do it in the same color schema, I try to create variation to where, like, I think if the hair had more darker blues in it and reflected up to this bright blue at only its highlight points, it would feel more like hair to me. As it is now, it almost looks like she has plasma energy whipping off her head, and that's a bit disruptive. The only other thing that stuck out to me was some of the purple blends are a little rough. You want to make sure when you're dealing with purple, we get nice edges on there and we get smooth. Purple's always tough to blend with, but there we go. Overall, I like your skin tone variation. That looks really nice. The muscles are well defined. All the black looks good. The gun here could have a little bit more going on. This is a little flat between the black leather hand and this. So like think about adding, differentiation in this area. This looks really samey and we've got a gem unpainted. But on the whole, I like what's going on here. All right. But good stuff, man.
Entering into some of these models myself.
There you go. Yeah, you are. You got them Drukari going.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Eric, I'll toss this one over to you, which is Tam the Third. He brings us a little Lord Castellant, and he said what his real area of focus here was his gold, which he is trying to improve. And he tried out some inks and stuff, but he's not sure about it.
Yeah. Well, give me some zoom ins. On initial read, I do like kind of that chestnut in there. I think there's a lot of it's crazy how since the Stormcasts have come out, how much experimentation with gold the community has done, and so not that anybody's necessarily figured it out because I think with so many choices, it means that everyone's exploring. There's not one way to do it. I think there's some really good things that are going on here. Obviously, when I look at the crown and I look at his belt and I look at some of these other things, you do have a good amount of shade and shadow in those golds. And I think around that chest piece, that kind of lightning emblem that has the blue center and the bolts coming off to the upper left, I think that chestnut does a good job of providing pretty subtle but still distinguishable gradation and shadows. I think if you wanted to, you could possibly go darker in some areas, but I don't know that you need to. I don't know that it needs to go darker. In this case, it's more like you've got. In some cases, if you do go darker, you get a lot more areas of darkness. But I feel like your ink, where it is creating enough darkness, so that I'm seeing definition. It's just not a large. How would you put that? It's not a large path of gradation from the dark to the.
Yeah, I feel like we need to go push those inks farther, right? Really get the shadow in there.
But I think, but where it is, you can definitely see it, and it definitely has. It's like, how is it? It's like the dark areas are dark, but it doesn't have a lot of travel, right? It gets light really quickly.
Right.
So if you pushed more inks into there, you get more gradation, you get more kind of travel of those values from dark to light. So yeah, and the chestnut ink works. From here, it looks like it's fine. It works really well. It looks like it's got a little bit of red in it even, which I don't know if I've seen a lot of sepia to red inks on gold in this
But that could work really well with with the reds that you have in the gowns and the handles, etc. So I think it looks good, and I do think I'm seeing good highlights. I think the picture may be a little bit overlit, too much light coming down from the top, because those top areas, those top points are bleaching out. But that could also mean that you've got your good silver highlights on there, and they're just catching those more than the gold areas are. Yeah. Anything else to add there, Vince?
Nothing else for me, buddy. I agree.
There we go.
All right.
Coming in hot.
Indeed. Next up, we got John Gallant, who has a big T-Rex for us. So let's talk about the monster. So with these big natural monsters, this is the Whiz Kids one. Okay. And with these big things, his question was basically like, he says it's his first time trying this ink, which he really liked. That's good. And that also, he said kind of, this is his first time doing like a really big thing like this. And he said, like, is there, some different stuff I should be thinking about when doing these big things? And so the answer is yes. Yes, there is. So especially when you're dealing with a big thing that's also a largely natural thing like this is. That is to say, this thing is nearly uniform in its texture, right? It doesn't have, it's not like a Age of Sigmar, dino that's got armor and gold and other creatures hanging off of him, right? It's just a big natural creature that's mostly made of one thing, scales. And so when we're looking at something like that, right, what we want to then think about is what are our opportunities to add more interesting variation to keep it in there. And my thought in looking at this, and actually if we go to one of these other shots, you'll see it like right here. In between the scales and the recesses under the eye here and here around the nose and this jawline, like kind of in these areas, having some more variation down deep in the scales. So carefully working in some very targeted stuff. Oil washes are pretty great for a guy like this, because you can really accomplish a lot with them without sort of risking the greater paint job. So like varnishing him and then giving him a nice sort of deep, dark colored oil wash can go a long way. So that might be a direction you want to think about for something like this. Also, really making sure you kind of push just a few little highlights around. So it could be like at the tip of his nose or edge scales or things where they've gotten, sort of dry or flaky or different. I understand you don't want to push it into cartoony. You're trying to do something fairly realistic here. So that being said, you want to create that tonal variation in there still. You can also do things like add scratches to this thing. Think about how much cooler the T-Rex in Jurassic Park looks once he's gotten torn up by the raptors or whatever, like the one that has scars, like the main T-Rex we meet, the one that that had gotten fought by raptors or whatever, and he comes back later and saves the day in some of the later movies or whatnot. That dude just looks so much cooler after you see him with like the heavy scars on his skin. This creature would probably tussle with other dinosaurs, right? It's a big natural creature. So doing something like adding scars and grown over things lets you work in some deep reds or purples or sepias or sorry, not sepias, crimsons, deeper stuff like that you wouldn't otherwise have an excuse to put into this model. And that can create a little more visual interest. So when you have a big model that's very samey, you want to think, okay, what can I do? What's my opportunity here to create visual interest? Because you've got a blank palette, you can paint pretty fast. Like I don't know how long this took you, but I will say, you can, if you have, say, an airbrush and stuff like that, you can get a big model like this done in an hour, right? But that doesn't mean you should stop. It just means now you have more hours to do other stuff. And so just think about what you can then spend that dividend on. This large model poses a very unique challenge, even amongst large models, because he is so uniform. It's actually quite rare that you get to do a large model that's this uniform. So that would be my thoughts. All right. Eric, back over to you for Joseph Unger. His second post said he's been painting on and off for 18 years, Army combat veteran, and he's trying to do sort of realistic stuff. He likes that realistic look. And he just recently moved from 15 millimeter up to 28 millimeter. And so he's trying to expand his skills.
All right. So he's, used to, in those small layers or small models, obviously he's using some techniques, base coat, do a wash to catch in those details. And I think a lot of times natural means sometimes less contrast, I think. Might be a good way of characterizing it sometimes. So right off the bat, it does look like you're doing a pretty good job of that. Although I think the smaller millimeter also tends to be more realistic or more historical. I know there's a couple of 15 mil or 10 mil sci-fi or fantasy ones. But as we look at this guy, you definitely, probably one of the challenges is you've got more room to do. And so what do you do with that? How do you work with it? And the first thing you've got going for you is you've broken up your space. You've got more panels, you've got more sections, you got more areas, you got more textures, and you've done a good job of breaking up kind of that armor. Now, I will say, going from, this looks like an infinity model, would that be accurate?
Yep, that's right.
If you're going to go to 28 mil, infinity's got a lot of detail, and so it kind of gives you that space, but it puts so much detail in there, in that space, that it's not necessarily, you don't have as much freedom, and there's a little bit of trickier things. From the infinity models I've painted, I do find that that wash technique does a lot of your work, especially on kind of like the undergarments, to get, you start with a light color. Let's say you're starting with a light gray, and then you wash it with a dark ink or shade. It tones that white or that light color down to kind of a darker gray, and then gives you your recesses. And so you get kind of a really good undercoat or what would you call it, a tactical suit or something like that. So I definitely think you still want to use your shades to your advantage, especially with these highly detailed models. Then what I find, the other thing, you've got these spaces of high detail, but then you've got these big panels, and you've got, the blue armor on the forearms, on the knees, especially the big panel on the shoulder. And that's where I would definitely suggest starting to play around with some blends. You pick a couple of shades of blue. You've got your line highlight color that you've been working with, and maybe start off with trying to gradate from a light color at the top of that pauldron down to the darker color down there, and then still use your highlight color around the edges on the bottom, but you can go to a brighter white towards on the edges on the top. That just starts breaking up that space. You could try some freehand. You could start doing some stuff like that. Otherwise, with Infinity, a lot of what you're doing is trying to use a very fine-tipped brush to create, I suppose, layers of lightness. So instead of just going, base color, shade, maybe one little highlight, you might want to go with a couple of layers of highlight in different shades to work your way up to your highest points. Guns in Infinity are, again, highly detailed. They are, could be one color, could be two colors. If you're going the more realistic, obviously you're dealing with like a black metal or a black steel, and then you're just looking for subtle highlights. I think the guns where you're going to get your most work on trying to get the straightest line edge highlights and thinnest edge highlights, and so that's probably where you're best off there. Now, I don't think you have to go trying to get non-metallic or super shiny or anything like that. It's up to you on what you think is realistic there. But I think even just, working in, if you're working with a black gun, getting some gray highlights to work it up a little bit up, and then, kind of pinpoint highlights with the white kind of on those corners and topmost edges, etc. Will get you there. So the nice thing is on one hand, you've picked a model that has as much tiny detail as those 28 mils, or sorry, the 15 mil. But there's a lot of different textures and a lot of cool different techniques to use on these models. So I think I mean, you're using good muted colors. You're going to a blue a little bit. But then I'd say that some of that realism that I see in people's work is in those gradations and blending and going from not just, base color, one highlight of a mid-tone and another highlight of the top tone. I think usually it's the blending and working on those things that at this scale starts making them look more realistic, like they're interacting with the environment. So those are my thoughts, and you got your work cut out for you with going to the Infinity stuff.
Yes, indeed, they are super detailed, complex minis for sure. All right, so let's see. Next up, we have an Imperial Fist from Phillip Reed. We've got two different Space Marines, and we have Quinton Alexander brings us Rebute Gulamon. So I'll tell you what, I'd love to take the Imperial Fist if that's okay with you. If it says I painted one of these fairly recently.
Nice.
I like this color scheme. If you want to take the Rebute Gulamon,
I will take the Rebute Gulamon.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so Philip, let's talk about your Imperial Fist. So overall, he looks good. Like, that is to say, you have a nice looking Imperial Fist. Your yellow looks quite smooth. And you've got a clean application here. I think the face looks really good. The face has some really nice variation in it and work in it in detail. So I actually quite like the face. I don't think I'd give you much of any feedback on the head. So let's talk about where we've got our opportunities for improvement. I also quite like the skeleton hand on the Power Fist too. That looks really cool. It's a neat little thing he's got going on there. That's a really cool trick. That's super cool. All right. So now I'll talk about the Imperial Fist scheme for a minute here. I'm the first one to admit I am not the expert of experts when it comes to Space Marine color schemes. My understanding is Imperial Fists can have the shoulder edges be also in the crimson color, and I would recommend that. So if you're going, let me just say it this way. There's one of two things you want to do here. Your main problem area with this miniature is you have way too much uninteresting black. Okay? Like the edges of the shoulder here, the shoulder pauldron, and then you've got this checker pattern you put the red skull over. The problem is when I zoom out, all it looks like is this is all black. I don't see that this is a pattern versus this being the pauldron because there's no edge here to separate it. So if you're going to use this checker pattern, then you need to like have a ring of yellow surrounding the whole thing or something. So that way it looks separate. Alternatively, you make these crimson, and that's really what I would recommend. The miniature becomes much more interesting color scheme wise if this centerpiece is crimson, as are then both of these shoulder edge pauldrons. The difference in composition there of what happens is pretty massive. Then your black still pops out. Black doesn't dominate. Black is a boring void, right? Like black is not an interesting color. It is in fact the opposite of visual interest. I can prove that to you. Shut your eyes. How interesting is what you see? Okay. So like it's the simplest explanation. So my honest answer for you is that's where I think you've got an opportunity here. Now, going with the black, let's say we wanted to stick with the black. I'll work with what you gave me here and say, okay, well, we've got to, for whatever reason, we have to stick with this because my particular chapter has this black. Okay, cool. That's fine. If that's the case, then I would return back to my recommendation to two things. One, we need to edge all this. We need to edge the pauldron on both sides in like a gray. We need to pop these rivets out in steel. We need to get a nice yellow or white or something edge around the checker pattern, right? Something to make it stand out. My other note for you is going to be on the yellow. I would encourage you to push your contrast in the yellow farther. I'm not saying you need to go as far as I did, like when I did my Imperial Fist. If you want to check that out, I posted it somewhat recently, like back in November, I think. But you don't need to go that far. Okay, I'm not saying that. But it should be a little more than this. A lot of your yellow feels very samey in a lot of places where it feels like there should be a slightly stronger shadow. So like up under his legs and at the tops of these plates right here on his leg, up under his arm right here. Like these areas are the backside of his chest plate. Like these areas are quite dark. But it feels like we're not really experiencing that darkness because it's all still basically the same bright yellow. So those would be my two pieces of feedback, one compositional and one just sort of the good old fashioned, everybody's favorite tonal variation. Take a drink. But that would be my stuff. Overall, you've got such a wonderful handle on you've got getting the yellow down clean, on playing around with a different freehand, on really, 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 really nailing the skin tone here and like the face, which is, it's a huge part of the battle with these Marines, because if you can make the face look good and realistic, you've done most of your work. So you're in a really good place. It's just a matter of pushing it a little farther. Okay. All right. So with that being said, let's turn to Rabute Gulaman.
Yeah. So a couple of things that are being kind of asked here. One is, how did I do on my gold? He's a little bit, worried about it. Obviously, gold is a big part, but he's feeling pretty good about it. But it's a big part of this model. And then the other part was on the sword. Whether or not this flame effect looks good, or if he feels a little bit like it's a little bit sloppy. First of all, I think I know that the base comes modeled, all that kind of stuff. I think the snow placement looks really good on here. It feels like he's on a cold spot, and it's kind of scattered the way I would imagine it to be. The thing I think in general around the gold, I am seeing some good contrast. I think you could go further in a lot of places because there is so much gold. Even where there, like you look at the feathers on his pauldron, or on his gauntlets and on his boots. You can definitely see there's a wash in the recesses there. But because there's so much gold in so many places, you want to continue to find ways to move the eye around there. So if you can find, especially like so on those wings when it's real close to the body of those birds, if you could darken those up. Same with on his chest. And then if you flip through these, what I maybe am not seeing in your gold work is highlights. And so if you flip one more, Vince, for me, I think. You see, so you can see on these feathers that are the closest, you can see on that double-headed eagle pauldron that's facing us, I'm not seeing any bright spots. And that could be taken care of either with a silver. Highlighting with silver is always jarring to me, but I know when people do it well, that works real well. Or there's some, if you can mix some silver and gold together to get a really light gold to make that highlight up there. But I would say you want to push that some more. And here's another case too, like even those heads and underneath those golden wings, between those feathers, you just want more contrast in this guy because there's so much gold. And so that, I think it's a great start. You've got some good contrast. I think you can push that further and then work your highlights. Use all the tools that are available for making gold pop on this guy. And there's a lot of it, but this is also one of those models where this is an opportunity to push it and learn how to do even more techniques. As far as the sword, this view in particular is pretty good for us to see the technique on the sword. And I think other than being a little bit shiny, maybe from a wash or something, I think your placement of colors is pretty good. Where I would say what maybe we could see more of is it pushing more into a yellow towards the tip of the sword, or having more yellows to kind of start bringing more heat to it. Because right now it's kind of like a warm sword. As you add yellows in there, then it starts becoming a hot sword. And so you could go a little bit further there. Now, the other thing too is, flame is organic, and but swords and steel are machined. So I think you're doing a good job of what you would, where you've got the blend from the red into the orange on the blade itself being more even and consistent. I think you still want to do that. And then as you work back into the flame that you've got, if you could find ways to separate the flame, I know that the one on the like the heavy metal way of doing it shows some really good examples of it. I don't know if they show any, Warhammer TV does any painting of the flame. But I think that if you can make that blend consistent from the hilt all the way up to the tip, and then go back in and worry about the organic flames kind of coming in and licking off of that, then you can start maybe showing more intentionality in where you're putting your oranges and yellows and reds, etc. And the other thing I'd say is, in order to get more yellow into this, I'd say you might be pushing the black out of it. I definitely see where people are using black on flame, when it starts getting into smoke, etc. But I don't know that you need that here. I think you want that to be more just the, again, yellow, orange, get more yellow down at the base of that flame and move up to red at the tip. Maybe you could probably go with a darker red, but I don't know that I'd go with black in such few areas, because it just looks like, I don't know, I think it looks a little more like tentacles or some other physical thing. So those are my thoughts.
Right on. Okay. Let's see. So next up, Emile brings us a nice elf and an attempt at some NMM. And Maroc has his Doom Wolf. And he's asking us about some black fur. All right, so I'll take the NMM elf if you want to take the wolf.
Sure.
You call in the wolf? All right, so here we go.
Ooh.
So Emile says that he took another shot at non-metallic metal and he'd love some feedback on that. Sure. And he said, please be hard on him. He's trying to get good enough to go to Golden Demon. As you like, man. First of all, you are good enough. Anybody is good enough. Go and compete and go get feedback from the judges. That's the answer. Set yourself a goal of like getting a finalist pin. And then once you achieve that and so on and so forth, like talk to the judges, talk to other artists there. There's no reason to hold back. Compete now, compete often. That's my super best advice for you. Number one. Nice. But let's move on past that and into this particular mini. Okay, so I'm going to focus my attention here on your NMM stuff, since that's chiefly what you're looking for feedback on. Overall, this guy looks really good. Just a quick note on things I do quite like that isn't NMM. I quite like the look of the base. I quite like the look of the skin, especially in the face. You did a nice job of capturing out the really bright highlights, of drawing a lot of attention to the face. I think you handled that really well. So that is something you should very much be proud of and feel like you have a good mastery of. So well done there. Now, turning to the NMM specifically, this guy's a little tough because he is kind of an older model and he's not as smooth as you want. And like, one of the hidden things about NMM is that you have to have a near pristinely smooth surface to execute it and make it look right. Okay, a lot of people think, well, I'll just put it over anything. I'll just do this in NMM. If you have a rough surface, it's going to be very hard to do like a glazing-based non-metallic metal, because glazes, which is what you're building here, glazes require a lot of an extremely smooth surface to work, to deposit the very small amount of pigment very evenly. Now, there are other forms of NMM you can do over rough surfaces. Maybe I should make a video about that sometime. So you can do stippling style NMM and stuff like that. But this style, yeah, you're not going to have it. I point all that out to say, like, the sword on this guy is classically not the smoothest surface, and that's where it kind of falls apart. Now, if we look at your gold, let's take the two colors individually. We've got some gold, we've got some steel. Okay, where the gold looks really sharp, and I really like it, is in the in this area here. Okay, because you didn't highlight every scale equally. It's exactly right. You cast a nice reflection line right down here where his leg is stepping out, and hence it's creating this reflection point. I dig that. That's very well done. What I would say is you still want a couple reflections on the corners, maybe here and here, just a little counter reflection of reflected light where it's going to come down hit the ground and bounce back up, and it would catch these tiny edges here. Don't take it to the same white or the same amount of white, but a few little dots here and here of reflected light. In the same way, we want to cut a deeper shadow here. So bring those browns down. Okay. And and really the main feedback I'm going to have for you here, by the way, you're scratching around, Eric, when you move your mic over your coat again.
Sorry about that.
You were your microphone is scratching over your shirt sweater thing. Okay. Yeah. No issue. Anywho, the long and short of it of my feedback for you here is contrast. So what we need here is more contrast on some parts of this miniature. And that's true with the gold. So what I want to see with the gold is I want to see it get deeper into shadow in some more places. I want to see us drag a shadow up right here. Like if light's coming down like this, I want to see a reflected shadow get pulled up here, up here. This should be darker. This should be super dark right here. Actually, right here. This would be the darkest spot. Just darker here and so on and so forth. Same within your whites, you know, take me, if this is truly reflected, like you want to think about the nature of the surface. A cone shape like this, a light line is going to drag down it because it's going to hit and spill across the surface vertically. So you're going to get a light line down all the way here. So we need like a light reflection line coming down this way. All in all, you've got good tones. It's really just a matter of pushing the contrast is what you need. Now, as to the sword, this is just a awful sword for NMM. It's so difficult because it's got all this filigree and lettering in the middle. But my ultimate answer with the steel, like the sword is fine. You've got some different effects in there. I would kind of, I don't know. The sword's a tough one. I'll leave it to the side to say whether or not you're happy with the sword. Because you're clearly working in other colors and going for reflections, and that's fine, but it's tough because there's also this filigree. What I would do is try to clean it up a little. Like we've got some inconsistent spots right here of darkness and stuff like that. Like, and that could just be because the filigree is kind of messing up the effect. I don't know. So I'll focus on the silver and other places. Same kind of story. You have a really nice blue tone in your steel, which is good. You've got the right color palette here. Like you are doing quality NMM. We just need to push our contrast further and smooth everything out a little when in certain places. So like here, I would love to see some things get to pure white with reflection points, like give me some light catches, stuff like that. And I would love to see some of this up here on the individual pieces get a little darker, stuff like that. Like you've got a really nice down here. You capture like this black right here and here. I like that. A little bit of smoothing out where we get more of a transition, but on the whole, it's good. Like you're making great progress with this NMM. You really are. My next challenge for you, once you get done with this, once you master this, trust me, you just get to the next challenge. Because the next one is then you probably want to put in some little tiny scratches or hashes. Like this is an elf, so he should look pretty clean. I get it. I'm not asking you to orcify the guy. Okay. But some tiny little scratches or hashes or something, just so you get kind of a sense that this dude is, that there's little imperfections in the steel. That kind of stuff can really help. Okay. All right. But with that being said, I think you've got a freaking great looking model here, man. So well done. Okay. Doom Wolf.
Yeah. All right. So black fur. First of all, the sculpt, again, that head, your style of wolf heads is fantastic on this guy. The stance is fantastic. You know, I really like your ice basing that you've been going on for a while, and it, you know, even the kind of scattering and dusting of snow on top of it adds an interesting texture. Black fur, though. I think if we go to the next picture, we see a little bit more of this, and it's, you know, kind of this stippled fur. And I think, you know, Marak, you're sculpting a lot of this fur, if I'm not mistaken. And part of the issue is you don't have a lot of space on the fur. There's not a lot of room to transition and bring in other colors. And I think with black fur, when I've seen it be successful, it's often because it's, the black is reflecting some light in some way that brings in a blue or brings in something else, and then travels to a really pin line of white and then back to black. And so there's room to kind of give it some color while making it mostly black. Like the issue here, I think, is because you've got so much of these edges, these surface area edges, that that means that you've got a lot more points of highlight that you feel like you have to cover, and so it kind of feels more like rough waves or something like that than dark fur, shiny fur, etc. Now it's matted. What I with my when I was sculpting feathers and try to paint those in black, I definitely needed to go up to a bright point in order to pick out the differences of those feathers, but they had a little bit more width or length in each of those strands, as it were, to give myself some more space like that. So I think in lieu of that, I think you almost need to focus in on, Vince, you talk about like the cloaks on the Vanguard Hunter models for Stormcast and how they have short little hairs and that sort of stuff.
Right.
And so I think what you need to do in order for this to feel black is to make some of the fur not black. So go towards grays or go towards some other tones, and then work up to kind of, down the back, be the blackest point. And so instead of using, being able to paint individual strands or whatever of hair in a certain tone, make his fur this blue. See on the ice where you're going from black to that blue. Do something similar with his fur. Maybe his arm fur is lighter and whiter and picks up more of that blue from the ice, and then it works up and is black at the peak down the back, or on his crest or whatever. And then in that space, you don't have to highlight those edges quite as bright, because you've got other points around the body that have highlighted up that high, and so it becomes darker and you get some more of that. Otherwise, I think if you're trying to go for just pure black, then I think you highlight with something mid-tone in the way you've got a lot of these white highlights, and then you just give yourself a few spots where you're going quite as bright. But man, I don't know that I've had the opportunity to do very much black hair, so that's me kind of just speculating on that. But I hope that helps a little bit.
No, I completely agree with you. I mean, you got to to really capture. So the trick with black is 50% of the surface has to be black. But beyond that, and the eye will still read it as black. Beyond that, you can go with almost anything. So you can fool the eye in a lot of ways. So yeah, I think working in those other tones, I agree. All right. Let's see. Next up, Tom Philbrick brings us a cute little doggo warrior. All right. And then we've also got big old Papa Nagash. So I'll take the doggo if you want to handle big Papa Nagash. How's that sound?
Sure can.
All right. So Tyrion the dog warrior ready to defend the pack. He said he used several of the MIG oil brush colors to see how far he could blend the leather bits and cloak. Very nice. Okay. So let's take a look at that. All right. So all in all, I really like this little dude. I think he's adorable. So I think from this front shot, we're going to get most of what we need. I like his face. I don't like this. I have a personal dislike of this style of sculpted chainmail. That has nothing to do with your work. That's just literally the model itself. We don't have any choice in that. But I just, yeah. So when I look at how you've handled this, you've added a lot of detail to what's really, overall a fairly simple miniature. I think your color on like the sword looks really nice. I like the little blend there. I think that looks really solid. You did a nice two-color blend that I think actually creates a really nice metallic variation in there. So I dig that. I think like the shield and the cloak all look good. So my main pushback for you, Tom, my main challenge for you, I guess, whatever you want to say. My challenge, if you should choose to accept it, is I think on things like the leather. Like you mentioned, using the oil brushers on them and stuff like that. That's cool. I think those look, I think they have a really nice tone, and you've got some nice shadow. Where I think we could go farther is probably with the texture, right? So what I'm missing with them, realistically, is that it's actually leather, because I just don't feel the texture on them. The leather feels like it should be scuffed more than it is, or have dots, or water staining or stuff like that. Like with leather, the name of the game is generally making it look a little rough. Now, again, you can decide your level of involvement here. You don't have to beat it up to high heck and back, right? I'm not saying that, but I think that would give it a more sort of organic feel, and also help separate it in material from the cloth, right? Right now, the cloth and the leather are both about equally scuffed. Like you put a few in here, these tiny scratches, but they're so faint, and they're also kind of thick. What I think your right answer here would be is some stippling for like staining, because the leather would absorb these water stains. Hey, there's this happy little dog he based it on. And my God, I'm so glad we clicked to this slide. That dog is adorable. Holy Moses. All right. So, like we have these little scuff marks, but I'd love to see more stipples, more color variation throughout. So I think rather than, like the oil brushes are cool because they let you get like hyper smooth. I don't want you to be smooth with this leather. I want you to get rough. Which is ironic because we're talking about a dog. See, rough dog puns. Okay. So overall, that would be my big challenge for you, is working on that. Other than that, like the texture on the fur looks really good. The cloth looks nice. The base looks good. I'm not sure I don't think you were going for gold on the shield with the fleur-de-lis. I think you just wanted it to be yellow. I would work still a little bit of sepia low tones into that yellow just to make it a little more visually interesting and less overwhelmingly yellow, because right now it looks way more yellow. Like your gold is looking very brown in comparison because there's no similar tones over there. So it might be the right answer to just turn that thing gold, like because it's just painted gold or whatever. Just so you don't get this weird balance between like a very brown sepia yellow and a really bright like lemon yellow. That feels a little bit out of balance. But yeah, there you go. Overall, great work. He looks wonderful. He's adorable, and he's definitely a great reference to your doggo. All right, Avid Lang brings us Nagash, Supreme Lord of the Dead.
People still paint this guy?
I know,
man. No, so there's some really cool things that we need to maybe push through a couple of slides first to pick up on. First of all, obviously, Basin looks amazing. Really cool setting and kind of environment you've created. Overall, I really enjoyed the warm tones here. Nagash isn't often painted with warm tones, and I think this green helps with that a little bit, but you've got the reds, the yellow bone, etc. When we go a couple of slides in, you can start seeing some tones on his cloak and on his on the purples. So Vince, if you advance, you're gonna really dig.
You want me to go farther? Okay.
Further to the right. Yep.
Okay. I'm all the way. Oh no, I'm all the way to the right. Hold
on.
Let me
sorry.
back it up.
Go back to the left. I apologize. Well,
okay.
like that
ghosty book.
There you go. Stop
Is this one you're looking for? Okay.
Yeah, if you look in there, you'll see a lot of tones in the greens of the cloak, and then all these freehand skulls painted. And you'll see those all around the side, and there's a little bit on his cap, etc. And I want to say that the coolest part about this, what you painted here, is this cloak. For two reasons. One, you've created a lot of visual interests from far away in terms of where the cloak goes from darks and lights, etc. But then you've also created some acute or micro interest as you go in and zoom in and take a look at this freehand that you've had. And I think overall, throughout the model, you do a great job of pulling that together. And you've got a lot of places where, you have a lot of good blocking with your purples, with where these greens are, etc. If we go back to the, maybe it's a shot, maybe it's one more to the left. Let's see what we get. Yeah, so I would say where I think I am getting lost, or where I feel like the artistry and the intensity and the intentionality that I see in that cloak, and you can see Vince at the top of his hat, there's a little skull. But your yellow bone is so ubiquitous, and there is not enough contrast throughout it, or differentiation, or whatever, to really kind of balance what you've got going on in these other places. So obviously, as I said, there's even if you look at the armor, you've got a lot of really great texture, really good blends, etc. But I think where you've got in a lot of places, you've got some good, just highlights and where they are that are unusual. If you go to the second photo, Vince, over to the left, you can see his left pauldron. Look at there, and there's just some unorthodox, I'd say, or it feels like very intuitive blending and highlighting, to where, I don't know how you teach that that pauldron right there, where you've got such a sharp highlight and then it comes down the edge, but there's such a contrast to what's on this left side, or the bottom side of that highlight compared to the right side. It looks really good, but I don't know that I've seen that. The bone, however, doesn't feel like, or maybe it's because it's a bone and the gold on his faceplate is all kind of that same color. Maybe you're intending for the bone to be like gold. I think part of the issue is that on the acute, things like his face, helm, etc., it doesn't get bright enough and dark enough to show that contrast, to be reflective, etc. And overall, similar to the cloak, the bone elements don't have a lot of visual interest from, say, darkness towards the middle and lightness towards the tips, or something to that effect. That staff is that same kind of mid-tone of darks and light yellows, as other things. Up at the top, where the top of his helm, I think I see more visual interest there. Maybe because it's getting darker. But like the tentacles on the back don't feel like they've gotten the same attention or intentionality that a lot of the rest of the model has. So I don't know if the right answer is going to brighter white in those areas to make those pop.
Yeah, I have a thought. Mind if I?
Yeah. If you've got a more specific thought, for sure.
All right, I'm going to challenge we're going to all do this together here. Here we go. I'm going to zoom out to the full size on this. What is this and this and this and this and this all made of? The answer is the same material.
Yep.
It's not, but it is, especially in this yellow light. You're in a very yellow, warm light right now. You took this picture, right? So everything is just getting yellow washed. I suspect you intended for this to be non-metallic gold. If that's the case, we need to get way darker and pop up to way white, right? We need to pop out our highlights and really take our contrast up to 11 on that gold to make it stand out. To me, the purple and the green and the freehand elements here are genius. The basing is amazing.
Yep.
The story, the narrative is so perfectly wonderful. All of that is gorgeous. Where this falls down is the bone and the gold, because from a distance, they just all look like the same thing. And the bone, I agree with you completely. I think you nailed it exactly, Eric. The bone doesn't have the variation, neither does the gold, right? They all just kind of run together and appear. Now, I understand, again, we're in yellow light. In reality, this bone might be more white if we took it out of this very yellow light of the picture. Could be. But it should still be different, even in the yellow light, because, and you've got the answer. The answer is this crimson you've got on your in places like his little beard strands and the whatever this thing is up here on the end of his stick. Like, put bone into the lower shadows, or red, crimson, or whatever into the lower shadows of the bone. Why not? Like, again, if he can have this rockin' heavy metal cape with skulls and skeletons all free-handed in it, you can do that. I suspect what we've got here is a case of like, well, this is bone, so I'm going to execute my bone technique of whatever I do, right? And so he just kind of went about and did initiated standard operating procedure bone, right? Subsection bone. And a lot of us do that. We do that with leather and bone and these very common things we paint a lot. Whereas when he came to the cloak, he was like, oh, this is an opportunity, right? Because he had this big flat space and he's like, I got to do something here. And so he went out and did something crazy and it looks amazing. Right. So, yeah, I think work some deep crimson and black into the bone and in the middle, cut these sections down, make these lines in between go into basically black, bring the tips to darn near pure white, like go nuts with these and really make them stand out and disperse the yellow from them almost. And then leave your gold and take its contrast way up to high Heckenback to pull out the NMM. And that way it's going to look very ochre, very much gold, and it will stand out much stronger against the bone, which has now gone into a pale white, gray, crimson bone. And then all of a sudden, everything here is just going to snap into focus because every element will be very different from the other.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is getting those red. I wasn't sure to suggest going into the reds, where they're even out at the tips, maybe where they become more bloodied or more something else. And we talk about bone having sometimes that flesh is still on there, that reddish coloring, etc. And I think you hit it too, is where I felt like the bone felt autopilot compared to where he was so inventive and out of the box in so many other places on this model. Maybe, I mean, the bone can be overwhelming, so maybe that's part of it. But plus, sometimes when you're going to paint death, you're like, ooh, I want the bone to just look like bone and feel like bone. And you get a little maybe stuck on that. But I think in this case, you're right. That just go somewhere unconventional with the shading on the bone to bring it in line with a lot of the other tones and stuff you got going on and break it up.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're looking for a reference pick, again, just, go back and search on the page for any of the things that Bleep Bloop has done for his bone. That's exactly what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
That kind of like red crimson bone would make this pop, pop, pop.
Yeah.
It would be amazing. So that's my thought. Anything else you want to add?
No. This is a contender for pick of the month with that cloak.
The cloak is it's unreal. It's unreal how cool it is. Yeah. All right. Next up, we've got Robbie Brown. His first time. He's got some Sisters of the Thorn. Is that right? Yeah. And Scott Palmer has a D&D PC. So I'll tell you what. I'll take the Sisters if you want to take the D&D PC character. How's that sound? All right. So he says, he got to try some freehand. This was a lot of stuff. He tried to take his bases to the next level. And so he added some sculpted rocks, some tree branches from a local park, all this kind of stuff in different flocking material. And then one of the things he says is up here is he's got this sort of seasonal theme, and he also has an ally centerpiece model, blah, blah, blah. He wants a tree lord in there and stuff like that. So he's, it's seasonal wanderers, very popular. So here clearly we're in the autumnal season, right? Yeah. Which is always a popular schema, and for good reason, because it looks wonderful. So overall, let's talk about my initial first impression. I like this thing. I like all of these quite a bit. And the reason that I like them quite a bit is because you've chosen a very nice, striking color scheme, and you've compositionally balanced everything, and you have a pop color that's very attractive to my eye, which is this sort of bright yellow green you've used. Somewhere Jeff Egan is happy, and he doesn't know why, because we've got the Escorpina green coming out. So Mr. Egan is certainly, I'm sure, happy about that. But the use of that very bright, intense color against these otherwise quite desaturated, neutral toned models, I think is wonderful. because it really makes them stand. It really makes those elements stand out. So like using that on their eyes, on the banner, that kind of stuff. As to the execution, I think for the most part, you're pretty solid. Everything looks, quite clean. So I have no real issues there. I think you're pretty good to go. My main challenges for you are going to be in a few different areas. So I think the banner freehand is just fine, by the way, the like sort of flame thing. I have no issue with that. I don't think every freehand needs to be those awesome skulls from the last one. I think it's okay to also have some simple stuff that's just symbols and things. I think that works perfectly fine. So I'm good with that. The challenge that I would give to you is with stuff like the bodies of the deer, of the like the bodies of the deer and the antlers of the deer. The deer are where I see the most opportunity here. The bodies themselves, some of the blending is pretty rough. You can do a lot of interesting color variation over these things. It's a lot of space, but I think it works better when you've got, something more smooth going on. Or if you're going to do, like, you could also fake fur by doing little hashes or textures or stuff like that. That's also fine, but just something to sort of smooth them out. Same with the fur around their mane. Like, I'd love to see more ends of the hairs picked out, more interesting variation there. Color-wise, I think you're very sharp. I like the variation across all the ponies. I think that looks great. So no issue at all on that one. My next challenge in the same way would be around your medals. So I see this especially with the gold around like their hats and stuff like that, in that I want to see more variation, especially in those parts where there clearly would be like these very shaped leaves on their heads and this thing in the middle and that kind of stuff. Like, we can really push the contrast and shadows here and into a sort of, again, you're working in TMM and that's fine, but you can use those techniques from NMM to add some more of that shading in there and to push that contrast way up. Overall, their faces look really nice. I think you've got a nice amount of variation in the face. I think that looks really good. Now, on to the bases, since you did mention them, the answer is they look absolutely wonderful. Very well done. If you want a small piece of recommendation, on your rocks, work some more. You had a perfect chance with this autumnal scheme to work some red and crimson and rust into the rocks. Don't pass it up. It'll help carry out the autumnal scheme. The reality is that gray granite is actually pretty rare, pure gray granite. It's almost like in nature, gray granite very quickly either turns brown because of dirt and dust and mud, green because of moss and growth if it's in somewhere wet, or red because of innate iron deposits that rust, right? So it's very rare to actually have pure gray stone out in nature. You usually have colors worked into it. By the way, purple is another very popular color that gets worked in there for a host. When those things come together, when you get like greens and browns put together, you end up with purples. So my answer there is, use that opportunity. Your bases look wonderful. I like the big rocks. I like the variation. They look very natural. Let's just work some more tones into that stone tone. And I think you'll have something really fantastic. But these guys look really wonderful, absolutely beautifully eye-catching. I think they're a great unit. You should be super proud of them. Okay. Next up, Scott Palmer with his D&D mini. Eric, are you still there?
Yep, just on
there. He is. All right. All you.
So this guy is kind of unassuming when you first look at him, but as we go through, you're going to see some really cool non-metallic metal. And you had mentioned this a little bit too, kind of using with color, that stippling on the shield to kind of show light and that sort of stuff. You can, from that, oh man, you're just moving around. You just wait.
Sorry. Where do you want me to be? I was just giving everybody a quick overview.
Why don't we start here? You can start seeing kind of that non-metallic metal on that left pauldron, the left kind of shoulder and arm armor. And you can see really cool freehand on the shield there. but then that stippling from the darkness on the underside up to lightness on the right, even to where it almost feels like there's a quilting, or like the leather's been, what is it, tacked onto the that sort of thing, and those little pinholes are kind of like where the tack holes are, or something like that. So there's just a lot of really great texture in what would normally be a very low texture piece here as far as the shield. As we move around the back, so if we keep taking maybe two slides to the right, really great feelings and textures here. Now, I don't know what the texture of the either resin or plastic or whatever it is, but there's some really great darks in the dark kind of blue-gray up to a light blue-gray, but then there's dust and there's dirt and there's kind of these spots of yellow that mix and mingle in there, and that this cloak has been used, and it's been worn, etc. And so there's just those subtle additions of yellow add quite a bit here. And then as we keep moving around to the right, you'll see a little bit more, even more striking, kind of more where it looks intentional as non-metallic metal, where you get a lot of really darks, even on the gauntlet, going up to a brightness on the top of the gauntlet. And if we move one more, you'll see the top of the shield and kind of the non-metallic metal on there. And so just, really cool work there. I think if the hair even, we're just talking about black hair here, where for the most part it's black, and then just in a couple places, the highest peak, we've got some blues and whites, and then down kind of where it flips, there's some blues and whites. So really good job there. I think, cool basing when he's walking through water, and there's a rusty spear there on the ground. I suppose the only thing I could say, hey, there's more you can do, would be some freehand on the back of the cloak to match what he's got on the shield. But I think, all in all, and I suppose maybe the only other thing is I'm looking, if we go back to the left one more, Vince.
Yep.
The cloth down below his sword could likely get a little bit of a highlight and some texture on it to match either your shield, some stippling, or some scratches, or some remnants. Maybe you take the pattern you have on the front, the freehand, and do just the top of it, and have that freehand drop below where it's shredded, as if the bottom of the cloak used to have that same emblem, but it has since been ripped off, etc. I think that would add a little something here and there. Otherwise, the tones here are fantastic, and your shadowing, your non-metallic is subtle, but works really well, and your texturing is fantastic. So this is a great looking model.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is really cool. It's a very neat model. It's got a lot of potential to do interesting things. I think he did a really nice job with the texture on the cloak, right? Like I had mentioned earlier, the idea of like when you've got this, and I think that's one of the things that he took advantage of here. And it's something you need to think about, right?
Yeah.
Like when you've got the Nagash model is a really great example, but this is an example on a smaller scale, right? Because not everybody might be at the stage where they're like, oh, I'm going to do, giant layered skull freehand, right?
Yeah.
And that's fair. That's fair. But like just doing something simple like the texture on this cloak, right, where you can see how he stippled the pattern in to make it look more rough, right? Stuff like that. The thing on the shield, right, where he had this flat space, so he did this patterning to it. Little things like that can really take a large flat, what might otherwise be boring space, quote unquote boring visually, and make it really interesting. So, yeah, very well done. All right. So with that, Eric and I are going to take a little break. We're gonna go get some coffee, get a shower, have a cronut, like it's 2009 all over again, and then we'll be back, and we'll finish up the rest of the month. So back in just a moment.
See you soon.
All right, we're back. We've changed clothes. We showered. We found Kieran. He was hiding, but he's back. How you doing, buddy? Good to have you back.
I was buried under a bunch of Christmas present wrappings.
There was. Absolutely. Yes. I figured it was either that or the White Walkers gotcha. So, but we're glad to see you're okay. Back safely at Castle Black, ready to go. Eric is back again. And gentlemen, are you ready to get back into it?
Let's launch.
All right. So let me lock on myself and share up here. And as we return, we're going to go ahead and take a look at Andy Walker, who says this is his first attempt at sheer fabric and black hair. He's also using some realistic water. So let's take a look. You go away. All right. It's a very big photo. There you go. Loaded up just fine. Okay. So, yeah, good stuff. Oh, that is, there we go. Now I'm getting my zoom. Okay, great. So fun stuff. Let's take a look around here and at sort of these three images. We can sort of see everything we need to. So we'll start on the black hair. The black hair overall looks pretty good. One of the problems is we need an interference color. So when you're going to do these kinds of highlights on the black hair, you need some kind of interference color. That is to say, something to show the light pollution and the temperature of it. It's most obvious here on this back. So we have the lighter white and gray. Then we need some kind of like a blue or something like that to kind of sketch the edge if they're in cold light. Or we could use something warm. You could add a slight yellow tone to it or something like that to show warm light, which would make sense in this case because she is standing outside on the beach. So that does seem to feel correct, especially as we've said, there's a lot of light here because it's showing through this sort of translucent dress. So I would also be careful on the edges when you do this like edge light here. This hair is pretty clumpy. So you really probably need to get in here with like a quite thin brush and do some hashes, like some thin lines to actually bring this down, and a couple different successive layers of it, of like white-ish or, close to white gray, slightly darker gray, do some dark black, and then your interference color either glazed over the top or then also lined in over the top. But other than that, and then maybe you want to take it a little darker black down here in the shadows. I feel like we could get a little darker, maybe even lay some glossy black or blue black up here in the very shadows. That tends to look more black. And when you use glossy black away from the light, so it's not actually reflecting, where it's completely in shadowed from direct light, it will look blacker than black. Okay, so then next up, we've got the sheer fabric. Yeah, I think the sheer fabric works. I think you more or less look like the skin continues up unabated. You have you can see where the dress is bunched, and so there's no skin showing through. That effect looks very nice to me. I might deepen the shadow a little here, where it would clearly it would be lifted away by the edge of her sort of posterior here. So we'd have more of a gap like right here. So you'd want to darken that just a little. The other thing I would say is when you get this situation, you sometimes need to reverse shade. So what I mean by that is like this area in the center right here and here, where it's in between. If it's translucent, then if the material is translucent, then it's not, and this is something I wish I had hammered more on in the video. It's not just that you have to show the light showing through, but you have to show what happens when there's nothing to stop the light. And what happens is it gets quite dark, right? Because then you just have this big void. It's not reflecting the light and bouncing it back. It's letting most of it through. So what happens is this actually falls into a deeper shadow than it would otherwise be. Now, I'm not telling you need to take this black. It would just be a deeper blue, right? Maybe more akin to having the darkest parts kind of like you've got under the back here. Because we would effectively see all the way through to only then the further interference of the front layer of the dress, which is not lit, which is then creating the shadow, right? Okay, so as to the water, I think the water looks fine. I think you need to add a little more of it. Like it looks like we got wet, but we don't quite have water. So we need to do a slightly deeper pour there to really capture that. As to the tufts, those are really tall to be just like individual sprigs. I'm not sure what they're meaning to represent, but I would definitely get some more paint into them. Whatever the case, they are very uniform. Like you have a lot of highlighting here on her, and this is quite uniform for the size. Like if the light is this extreme to create these transitions, this needs to be darker in the center as well. This sort of like straw you're showing would be similarly almost translucent. So the center here where it's quite thick and bunched together should be dark by comparison to show what happens where the light isn't permitted to pass through. You can do this by just touching some sepia washes to the middle and then maybe an agrax down at the very bottom, something like that. But overall, very cool piece. It has a nice emotion to it. I think you really did nail the skin showing through. I think it looks really nice. Has just enough blue tone in it. It's good. It's quite good. All right. Next up, Josh Lawson with the Leprechaun.
Yeah, so he said this. He's waiting for the other side to come out and wanted to. He has been painting a little bit, so kind of easing back into it. And he said his goal was to create something sunny and bright. And I think at first glance, he definitely achieved this. I believe this is this is a goblin type miniature from the Weird line, right?
He is known as the Lucky Effigy.
The Lucky Effigy. So is it a real person? Like a being?
Puppet.
It's a puppet. Gotcha.
Yep.
All right. So I need to click back on. So this guy, so in that regard, I can see that the sculpt is a little bit like the legs and stuff aren't posed. It makes sense that the pose is like it is. But you do a fantastic job of creating a really bright highlights at the topmost levels of things, and they're very stark. So you can see at the most with the greenish yellows or the yellow greens, the top of the cloak, the tops of the hat, and then up into the clovers. And I think all around, like especially having that pink in the middle, you know, on his face, you get right to that. You see that red around the neck. All looks good. The yellow pouches, etc. There's a good amount of movement. I would say that I don't know if the orange on the cap, the kind of band of fabric going around the cap is meant to be a different color than what's around the neck. Those look a little bit different, and so I don't know if that clashes or if that just works with, you know, the bags being yellow, that hat being orange, and the neckerchief being red. Maybe that all works in a spectrum, but oftentimes we're talking about those, trilogies where we have a triangle of colors to bounce around. So obviously with the green, you got a lot of green all over, but you have the clovers and then kind of the two patches on the bottom of his cape that are the bright green, and on the shoulders. So you get a lot of movement around the model with the green. The pink, you got the hands, you know, so maybe the hands could be bring a little bit more of that pink into it, so that they look a little more fleshy and bright like that. And then I would maybe take the cloth around the hat and make that more red, like the neckerchief, so that those tie together. I feel like the shoes could also be something more like that as well. But otherwise, I think you've done a fantastic job with the color and the brightness. I guess one more thing I'd say is you have done so much shading and kind of even high contrast in a lot of areas, but the main clothing, the jumpsuit, is pretty bland. And you know, especially down on the legs, there's kind of some broad areas that don't look like they have as much contrast or as much brightness. So a way you could do that, and you know, maybe you did that a little bit with the cloak, is do some hashing and that sort of stuff to give more of an impression too that this is a puppet, maybe made out of burlap or something like that. So that, you know, that knee there. Or you could even paint do a freehand patch of some sort, you know, in that spot. Etc. But otherwise, I think that this guy has fantastic personality. You have made it sunny and bright, which probably adds to some of the creepiness, you know, because he's just out in the light and in the sun, and he's still going to come for you. But no, I really like this, and I think you've done a great job. Welcome back to painting.
Absolutely. Yeah, it certainly is a fun little model. He's tiny too.
Yeah, he's adorable. He's got the shamrocks and the horseshoes. Not sure where the rest of the Lucky Charms are, but you know, he's good. Absolutely. I don't remember the knife marshmallow, but hey, that's all right. All right. Next up, we've got Harlem Bad Dunkers bringing us a heck of a diorama here. We got a little scene.
So I think for the most part, I want to talk about this in the concept of the whole composition of it as a scene. So the few elements, of course, you're going to see right away is these three fighters challenging two Minotaurs. And he really sells the Minotaur idea, because when we get a different snapshot, you'll see that he has painted the entrance to a labyrinth behind that one Minotaur, just on a flat surface to give that depth. We'll come back to that here in a second. The other thing that's that you see right away is the ground cover that he's done. He spent a lot of time mixing in different mediums on there, from stone, leaves, tufts of grass, and even the dirt itself varies a whole lot in texture from front to back. The addition of some creeping vines onto the walls itself is a good addition too. And the other thing that I want to talk about the walls is he's got some crumbling rock that's sort of settling on all these uneven bricks. I actually quite like that the wall is sort of crumbling away, like that pillar between the doors is shifting a little bit, and on the far right side it's sort of pulling apart and separating. I you know, despite the fact that it looks wavy in some places, especially along the top, it does give a sort of an ancient feeling to it. However, having said that, one thing I want to add about the texturing that you've done on here is on the bottom bricks, you certainly did the wise thing and you pulled up a little bit of brown. So some dirt was on those lower bricks of the wall. I think to pull it through a little bit more, maybe you could have done a little bit more green tinting on the upper parts of it, especially because there's foliage settling up there and it's growing up. So you would have a little bit of greenish stain to add a bit more color to that wall itself. But let's spin through a couple pictures here. I want to, on the next frame, I think is where we get to look at behind the Minotaur. On the next frame that he shows. Yeah, so this is a good shot. And you can see what I mean, is he's just for some extra flavor there, and played around a little bit with the sconce torch on the wall, casting a bit of light. And you'll notice here from even the closed door that he has taken the attention to put a little bit of light casting out from underneath the door sill. So that's a good touch. Now, this is also a good frame where we can talk about composition of these things. So when you look here, obviously your first notice, at least for me anyway, the first thing I notice is there's two big Minotaurs. But unfortunately, because they are neutral in color, and especially the one on the right, whose colors are very gray, that match up to the wall behind, you immediately look away from them and you start looking at these fighters in the front, because that's where the high hue and more intense color lies. So I want to think of this in a similar way to how we think of a single model. And when we have different color splashes on a single model, just like Eric was talking about on the past one, you want a little bit of triangulation. You want your eyes to move around it and then continue to progress to the next thing. So I think in composition wise, what I might suggest here is that if we move one of those Minotaurs to the forefront and have another of the fighters behind him, like he's sneaking up, what if, for example, we sort of traded places with this red caped hero and the gray Minotaur with his big club, and had them sort of staring each other down in a bit of a melee. I think that your eye would travel around this as a composition as a whole a little bit more fluidly. Now, having said all that, and Vince, you can spin through a couple of other more close-up shots that he's got here so people can appreciate the paint work that he's done. I think that's all fine. This guy right here is the only one that is the real bugaboo of it. And I think the gray and the armor and the stone, like the gray skin, the tinny armor, and the gray stone all appears monochrome, especially when you look at it from this angle. So I like this. I would have stayed maybe with the same kind of fur and skin choices that you did on the other Minotaur for this one. That's my only other composition critique about the execution of color choice. The execution of color application is great though on all these things. But yeah, you can continue to flip through, Vince. Thanks. I just wanted to point out this particular guy. And yeah, again, other details like pulling up some dusting on that guy's red cloak as well has value and really captures the realism of this. People can appreciate some of the groundworks from this overall shot again. So I think you've really brought together a bunch of fun elements in this thing. You did say in your comments that this is your first time doing a diorama of this kind of scale involving so many elements. But I think that when you do the next one, you think a little bit more about the composition of those elements and how your eye is going to move around when you compare it and think of it maybe in the same way as you do to an individual piece, and how that's going to bring it together and how the viewer is going to take it all in. Yeah, so that's what I'd say about that. A good achievement though, and I think it really stretches your hobby legs to do something like this. Really good, my man.
Yeah, agreed. It's, you know, a good diorama like this, certainly it sells the story, right? Like, what we have to talk that certainly the big success here is there is no question exactly what's going on in this scene. It's evocative of a story, and that's ultimately what a diorama has to do. So in that regard, total success. All right. So next up, we've got three interesting things for sure. Okay, so first off, we've got Evan, and he has another lizard man offering for his army. We have a Bizarro Deathwatch kill team. It seems that this Deathwatch has failed. Deathwatch, you failed this city. And then we've got this particular nightmare here.
I mean, couldn't Chaos also be against Xenos? I mean,
this is their version of that, is what you're saying? Sure,
probably allowed.
Yeah, okay, I'll buy that. All right, so I would love to take the Deathwatch Bizarro team. If Eric, you want to handle the Lizard Man, and Kieran,
Sure.
You want to handle our two very creepy friends here.
Sure.
All right. So let's start with the Bizarro Deathwatch kill team. So he says he's a little less than enthused with the bases. Okay. He's trying to get a step look, but they feel too flat. He tried using the inks to shade the metals, but they came out looking messy. Okay. And he said that painting smooth bone is quite tedious. Well, yes. That's all right. So let's take a look, really focusing on those things. So the metal, the basing, and the bone. All right. So here we go. Yes, clearly we have our Nurgle rep, our Khorne rep, our Tzeentch rep, and our Slaanesh rep. And then I guess this guy is our Chaos Undivided rep here. So, if the Deathwatch is normally drawn from all the different... What's that? What was that called?
Sorry about that. That was just me clearing my throat. I should have muted.
Oh, okay. I thought you were correcting my Chaos Undivided comment.
No, you're good.
So, it's like, first of all, narratively, I dig it because, obviously the story of the Deathwatch is they're drawn from all the chapters. And this is a similar thing, but in Chaos Land. So that's fun. And every one of them reads immediately as whatever they are, right? Like, that is to say, you don't have to look. I'm not trying real hard to figure out who the Nurgle Marine is here, right? Like, so you did a good job at capturing all that. Okay. So let's start with the metals. Some of these metals are going to be tough to do shading on because it's this dumb print. So it's all these small, like this sort of letter stamp thing. See if we can get to some good examples. Yeah. This one will be nice. This is actually a good representation because it has all the stuff we want to talk about. So between like the gun here and the face mask and the shoulder pad. So when we're thinking about using inks to control our metals, when you have your inks, the first thing you want to do is you want to really work them back and forth and then do some intermediary mixes between the ink and the metal color to get a nice transition. And like here on the gun, I think we could take like some of this and trace around here with some black. Same here, deep in these shadows. It's not bad. I think the gun part here looks pretty good. Like you've got some good shadow control. So this is pretty solid. You're getting the edges, and you want to hit all those edges with silver. I think overall this is pretty right. The bullets, much the same thing. You've got the edges nice and trapped. You've got the darker parts there. You've got a little bit of splotchiness happening, but that's just something you fix over time as you learn how to sort of work with the stuff and smooth them out and get the ink to the right consistency and so on. So overall, I think the metal is pretty successful, but let me tell you how you can then solve it on things like this face mask or these shoulder pads or whatever, where you have kind of a surface like maybe the corn gal. This corn gal would be a great example. Where we have like all this text, right? So what we can do here is instead of trying to shade like that across sort of everything, just do some really bright stripes across the whole thing. What I mean by that is like take a stripe and run it here and here, or whatever lines up with your edge line. So I guess like here, here, and probably here or something, right? Because that's where you've told me the light is hitting. Like your reflection point on the side metal is here and here and here. So hence, if the light were traveling vertically like this, it would go boop and come across there and across there and across there. And cast those letters, like drag your brush sort of sideways across this stuff and make it all pretty bright silver. Not underneath, just the letters. Same here, same here. Take the other letters here and darken these down and do a transition in between like that. Much like you did, and you already know how to do this because you did it here with the sword, right? The reason we highlight swords like this isn't because of, like, we're not trying to capture energy radiating up and down. This is a reflection, right? Like what you're doing when you highlight a sword like this is saying that as the sword has moved here, it's so highly reflective that the light has come down, hit it, and then hit the ground and bounced back up. And this is like the point of light as it moves across. If he lifted his sword up, right, a foot, theoretically the reflections would be in different places because the light has moved across. That point where the light has collected has moved across the sword. Do the same thing here on these broad spaces. So you can do that with things like letter. You can do it with things like chain. I most often find myself doing it on chainmail. And then you can just have some individual light catches on the edges of letters in your shadows, wherever the light is. So like you kind of run some edge highlighting down, but so we go from the whole letter being silver to just like the top edge of the lower part that's in black. And that gives us really nice contrast. But overall, I think you did a good job with that. Now, onto the bases. Yeah, I mean, you don't just want to use cork. I mean, simple answer. Don't just use cork. If you want steps, if you want steps, I hit the wrong thing. Like, first of all, these steps are at a strange angle, like because they're buried in here. Not that you can't have steps that are at this angle. It's unusual for the model to be walking up something. It feels jarring to the viewer for the model to be trudging up. You almost never see models walking up a hill. You see them with like a leg raised Captain Morgan style, but they're very rarely coming uphill unless they're meant to be like cresting something. If you think of like mounted people will often have like one of their beast's legs just cresting the top of a hill, right? But then they push them to the very front of it. So if you're going to do a step upward slant like this, then the model needs to have like, he needs to be brought forward and there shouldn't be pieces out in front of him, right? He should be at the forward point. And what you're communicating compositionally is that this is a force to be reckoned with. He has this figure has crested the hill metaphorically and risen to the challenge, right? That's the metaphor the basing scheme is trying to communicate. Think of like the Lord on Dracoline, I think, is doing this in AOS. At any rate, the what you want to do there is thicker pieces of your material here of cork first. 1, 2, scuff them up, break them up more. 3, put more rocks and paste and other stuff around to mix it up and make it look not just like rocky steps. Even in rocky steps, there would be lots of dirt and stuff caught in the middle here. 3, get other colors in here. You're not going to find gray stone very often in nature because it just doesn't really exist very often. It rains. The wind blows. You know, there's organic material everywhere in the air, lichen and moss and everything else. So like things will turn green and brown and red and everything else in the world. And so, you know, work some color into there and then make it thicker, make it varied, put paste over it or a sludgy mix. There's lots of different things you can do. I prefer the Vallejo basing paste, but you can, whatever you want, you could mix your own out of just, you know, some grit and DAP or, you know, wallpaper spackle and glue or whatever. And that's fine too. Anything like that. Now, so that would be I'd say your major thing there. Now onto the bone. I like that you use different color bones. I love the pink bone on the Slanesh Death Guard. I think that looks great. I like that you varied it. Good. I think I would have liked to see more in the reindeer horns of the Nurgle Marine here. Like I would have loved to see them highlighted like a Nurgle Marine or like Nurgle, where this lower part is actually living and it goes out to a very dark black tip. You know, one of the keys with working bone is don't try to glaze your white, glaze your darker colors. So you kind of get the whole thing more toward the white, and then you pull darker colors successively down, covering less and less each time, right? And those tend to be easier to like feather the edge of and smooth out. It's easier to glaze with darker colors than with lighter colors. That can help make the bone work a little easier. For the things you didn't ask me for, it all looks great. I love the design of the armor. I love the coloration on the armor. I'm not sure the multicolored sword works. I get what you're going for. It's a bit rainbowy. You may have wanted to like do the sword more traditionally and then had like runes that are in the 4 colors on there, because it's kind of like he's wielding like a rainbow bright sword. It just feels a little too much. It's very, very, very distracting. Like it really grabs the attention away from everything else on the miniature because you have this rainbow running the sword. But I get what you're going for. You're trying to capture all 4 chaos colors. Overall, though, I think it's nice. Good damage, good colors. They all stand out like as being what they are, but yet they all look individual. So like that, say the corn guy looks like corny, but he still looks like a member of this troop. So you did a really nice job harmonizing across there. Compositionally, I think it's quite strong. Their knee pad each marked accordingly is fine. Some of the freehand looks a little thick. Sharpen that up with a little flow aid into your paint. You know, you want some higher pigment stuff to do those kind of things with. So, you know, like an ink or something like that, a little bit of flow aid mixed in there, and you'll get sharper coverage. But overall, really good. I dig them. All right. You guys still there? Did I lose you?
Yep, you're here.
All right. Okay. Next up, Evan with his Lizard Man. Lizard.
Yeah. So a couple of things that he was looking for. Trying to respond to previous comments. So one thing, trying to get more contrast in the skin, working on his metals and using the gold shading and highlighting, and then trying to do some texturing on the leather straps, but he's feeling like maybe they didn't get there. Also interested in any other comments on basing, etc. I think from the outset, from this front, we see that his mask has a lot of contrast in it. That gold has a lot of shiny spots, that are bright and silver, and then some darker spots that are tarnished, etc. And I think overall, you've done a good job with having some darks, having contrast in that metal, where I think you could push it further. So, and especially in this one, it looks like there's a lot of flat areas where you've created more dimensionality in having, you know, shadows just underneath that ridge above the eye, and then brightness underneath the eye, and then, you know, darker up at the crest and lighter down near where, you know, his you know, where our ears would be, or the sides of the mouth. So some great things there. But some of the detail of the mask, the carving, etc., could use some more wash or shade to get in those recesses so that those things pop as well. So that would be just, you know, but that would not take long. I think you, in the wrist, you know, a bracelet, except, or man, my language is poor tonight, but his arms, armor, then, you know, you've got some darkness in there, and I think you could emulate more of that in the helmet, etc. So I think in general the gold is achieving what you're looking for, more contrast. Let's push around to the next image, Vince, and we'll see some more of the skin. I want to, if you can get to the one where it's we see more of his back, actually. There we go. So here we can definitely see where you've pushed the contrast. The skin tone is lighter out towards his feet and then darker towards the back. I think that you could still push that further. The scales themselves are, you know, pretty a huge opportunity for creating more differentiation. Lizards are notorious for having different kinds of spotting and that sort of thing. At the very least, if you went on those scales and painted each of the scales a darker green, a Coelian green or an Incubi darkness or something like that, where you are pulling that, kind of making those harder and rougher looking, and then highlighting those, I think you would get even, it would show how light the arms and the legs are. So I think you have pushed that quite a bit, and that looks great. I think you can still push it further to be able to call out and show that the visual interest, show the hands, let those stand out, but also let the scales be dark and distinct against the paler skin. The rock up above looks really good. I know you didn't ask for that, I think, but your shading on there looks really cool. I think per some of the comments in the last on the last unit, you know, about how that stone should have some more weathering on that, whether that be you know, some signs of rust that's settling into the, you know, if there's any iron in the rock, or some other types of greens that are settling in there. So that some things like that could be really interesting. I think your leathers look good. There's not a lot of leather in terms of like its surface area. You've got, it does look like leather where you've got the tones of the dark and the light are there. In terms of doing scratches, you could probably do a little bit more with a, you know, just a, get something a little bit lighter than that and scratch it up. But I think that might come off more as rope or something like that, because the size of it, and how thin those straps are. So that'd be more like braided rope if you did you know, too many uniform, etc. So I think it's all right. I think, you know, maybe you could go a little bit lighter just towards the top, where it starts cresting over the edge of the rock. You know, but I think all that looks good. The red has a lot of contrast in the, you know, the cloth and the feathers, etc. So I think I really like those. I don't know that you need to highlight those anymore. I think that they have a really great color. You can maybe highlight the tail a little bit more so it pops out to red, the brighter red, instead of just kind of the purplish red. As far as basing, I know this is one of, I believe this is one of the pterodon riders. And so he's used to straddling a big flying monster. So here you've kind of brought him down to earth. If we go back to the second, or if we go to the left, actually you could, yeah, either way, I don't remember what the last picture is. You know, here he's just kind of coming up on the hill, and his hand is a fist, because I think on the model he's usually holding a strap. What I would suggest doing perhaps is, instead of using that hand as, you know, him resting his fist on the hill, that you could drill that out, and get some sort of, you know, you could even green stuff something where it's a stick or a branch or something that he's holding on to, as if he's moving through the brush, something to that effect. Or you could put him on top of a log holding another branch. I think the hill, the kind of little rock or the hill, doesn't work as well with his closed fist. But I think, in terms of, it's better than him, I think, just standing on flat ground and having his fist down into nothing. So, yeah, I mean, and I think you could add some more. You've got kind of the rock, you've got some mossiness. Again, I think twigs and sticks. I mean, I don't live in the jungle, and I have sticks all over my yard because we have a lot of trees. Like, it's just a thing that happens. So vines and sticks and stuff like that would add more. And anytime you can add more color, so even on the side closest to us, would be a great opportunity. From this angle, you don't see as much of the red, so having a flower kind of coming out in the front and having some red petals or some red leaves could be a great way to pull that red from like the feather and the tail of the cloak or his tabard, and pull that from this angle, give you your triangulation. So I think you've pushed it. You've got some good contrast. You could push that further with the scales. The gold, even as you see this angle here, you get a lot of lights and darks. Show me that detail with a little bit of bit more shade in the recesses. And in terms of the leather, I mean, I think it looks good. It's the right colors, but it's kind of small to get too much detail or scratching and weathering in there. But maybe you can go a little brighter, and then add some more visual interest to the base to kind of fit it all together and get his hand on some sort of twig or vine or something. Those are my thoughts.
Makes good sense.
Absolutely. All right. Next up, Lucas.
Okay. Well, what the viewers are going to be presented with here is kind of a bit of an odd model, but yet there's some unique composition challenges in here that I'm really kind of attracted to. And that is, first of all, starting straight down the center, top to bottom. If you look closely, you'll notice that we have 4 faces to deal with here. And what I mean by that is, you have our hairy monster that's wearing a mask with a face on top. You have this little girl, and then she's also carrying her own little dolly as the 4th face. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But I also don't want to overlook the fact that Lucas has asked in his comments here that he was trying to do some eye glow. And I think he was also trying to achieve a bit of a glow from the runes that are on the musculature of this monster, which we'll look at on the next frame. But so let's start there. Let's talk about eye glow on these things. So on the mask and the monster is where he's predominantly trying to nail that down, it seems to me. So he's got a bright white center, and then it sort of smooths out into this pinkish, eerie color that emanates from there. Everybody wants to be a little bit careful about this OSL kind of glow thing. And I think that you probably were too, Lucas, but I want to encourage you. I think you can be more bold with it, in fact, because my first read on that is it's just sort of flesh, especially on the mask part, because it's in, that porcelain mask, and you've got sort of a bright scarred flesh is the color that it reads as. I think you can go more red with it, is what I'm going to get at. That'll do a couple things for you. It'll play off against the only other red spot in this model, and that is this little girl's dress. That comes in as a hot cherry red. Now, you still want to, when you do the eye glow, you still want to maintain your whitest of white hot spot in the center of it. And then you can get a little bit pink as you still stay within the orbit of the eye. But then I think when you start to cast up onto the porcelain and on, I guess, what would be the cheekbones of the monster, I think we can get into a little bit more of a darker red with that kind of thing as it emanates out. Now, you have to do this all with very light glazes, which of course you have done. I can tell that you're okay with that, and progressively as you get further away, that's going to diffuse a little bit. Keep in mind, there's still a couple of places where that is going to catch a little bit more. So the place that's missing on here is when I look at the mask, there's the underside of the brow, of the upper brow, which I think some of that light would cast onto as well. So you can get a little bit further out with that. And then probably a bit more onto the cheekbone surface on that mask part as well. Okay. Similarly, and you got to think of this as because of the proximity to the monster's eyes, if you can do the same thing, then just on either side of the point of the chin of that mask, on the underside of it, you're going to have a little bit of a red glow that shows up there. Maybe you do have a little bit of that. We don't actually have an angle where we can see it from the underside, but think about that too. Depending on how bold you want to go with that, you might get a little bit of touch onto the inner side of the horns as well from the monster's eyes. But if you don't want it so super intense, maybe stay away from that to avoid a little bit of the confusion. Yeah, so that's my take on eye glow. Is my point is that you can be bolder. The last thing that I would say is there's a couple of spots when you do that eye glow that you have to have. All intense light generally has some more intense shadow. So you have to, with those eyelids and the framing of the eyes, you can do a heavier shade just above the upper eyelid and below the lower eyelid before you move on to the cheekbone and before you move on to the sort of the underside of the orbit of the eye. Now, let's look at the runes on this fellow that's carved into his skin. So there's another frame here, Vince, that has both the side shot, but the backside shot is probably where we'll see it the most. Here we go. Okay, so I hope I'm reading what your intent was here correctly, Lucas, because if you're trying to do a bit of a runic glow from these kinds of things, the variation in how you've painted the runes themselves seems to indicate that, rather than it indicating that it is just scarring and heavy old scars, because that wouldn't appear as white as what you've done here. So that's why I'm going to assume for my critique here that you're trying to do glow on that also. Now, if that's the case, the sigils that you have painted feel right, because you've got some hot spots, you've got some spots where it's gone to just about pure white on there. But much like the eyes, if you've tried to remain a little bit more subtle about it, I think, again, you can be more bold about this and cast some of that emanating a little bit on the skin itself. Again, light glazes with this, you want to be probably just keep it within close proximity of each of the sigils, and it can be sort of just a soft glow. You don't have to necessarily shape it too much and have the same hard lines and follow the same sort of perimeter as you do with the shape of it. You can emanate a little bit. That one in the center of his back, for example, would probably cast up onto that green. And if it's red, it'll just kind of darken that out and dull that down. On the back of the arms and the shoulders, however, it's still going to just catch onto the skin. You may have a point on the lower arms where it catches onto his bracer that's on the left arm and have a little bit of light catch on there too. But yeah, be a little bit more bold with it, I think, is my overall suggestion to doing this OSL stuff. I appreciate that you wanted to be careful with it, but yeah, you can press that a little bit further. As far as other things that I want to say about this model, just so we can spin to some side shots, is the way that you capture the purple on this, I think, is very rich. I really enjoy that. The green can be a little bit intense, and I think the way that I might do it differently is if you can have a sort of a different level of intensity of that highlight green as it moves away from the skin. Here's what I mean by this. When you look at somebody with a beard, usually it is a bit darker towards the face, and then as it gets away from it and grows a longer beard, it gets a little bit lighter and lighter as it gets further away from it. Think about old men who have great big beards. It's usually pretty dark close to the face, and then as it goes away, it gets whiter and whiter at the trailing tips. I think that this would benefit from that too. And then you'll get a little bit more variation in your hair, so it's not uniform all the way out. And that'll add just a little bit more flavor interest in this gentleman here in the middle. And then let's finish off by having a bit of a look at our young lady in the front of all this. So I think the main shot is probably our best look straight on. You've done some good highlighting on this. The blonde hair is really convincing. So you've done a good dark part in the middle and had a couple light catches on the crown of her head. And that falls in line with the directionality of that sort of north-south movement of the eye. It follows that along. Same with the folds on her skirt. I think that on a tiny, tiny model like this, you've done a good job of making sure that that's caught properly. So I'll give you compliments for that. And then one last thing that I don't want to leave unchecked here is you have done some really great attention to this guy's claws and his fingernails, to make them look emaciated, and they could do a good color transition in a small space. So compliments on a tiny detail like that didn't go unnoticed. Another quick details to point out to viewers at home is he's done some weathering on that bracer that's on his left arm. Got a little bit of verdigris in there, so that adds good visual interest. Although the blue, it's not too much that is drawing away from other parts of it. So well handled in a lot of the paint application, Lucas. And I hope what we've said about eye glow and a couple other bits and pieces can help out if you want to revisit that part of it.
Right on.
So I'll leave you with those thoughts.
All right. Next up, we've got Matthew Hipshure, who brings us his a Space Marine with his first time painting a face. Okay. All right.
Face Marine.
Oh, no. All right.
Can't be unsaid.
It wouldn't have been a show. So anyways, then we've got Roddick, who brings us a nice little, another nice little diorama or setting here. And then Daniel Richards coming back. He says he hasn't played in a while, but he decided to start with painting some orcs for Kill Team. Awesome.
Nice.
I'd like to take the Space Marine here from Matthew, if that's okay. Kieran, if you want to take the I guess you did the other diorama.
Yeah, let me do the orc, and maybe Eric has some ideas about dioramas.
There you go. Exactly. Eric, you want to take the diorama, and then yes.
I'd rather diorama.
What's a diorama?
Exactly. And Kieran, you grab the orc.
Yep.
All right. So Matthew, he says first time painting a face. All right, so let's focus on that. Okay. So overall, we've got some nice tones in here. I like that we worked in a little bit of stubble, a little bit of blues and stuff into the lower part of the face. We have that nice dark shading. So my general impression of the face is this. It's good. There's a lot of non-traditional sort of just basic tan skin tones in here. There's some nice reds. There's some nice blues. There's some nice yellows, all that up top. And generally a face is highlighted like yellow, red, blue, right? Like that's kind of the nature of the colors of a face when reduced to its primaries. And so I think in that regard, it's good. Where I would push it is we need to bring some of this up a little brighter. The lips should probably have some kind of color. You don't want to make male lips like, red or pink or something, but it should have like some kind of deeper, almost purple or magenta or something desaturated. Just something to show it being the lip, I think would be good. And then on things like this dude has eyebrow ridges like he's a Cro-Magnon, right? Like apparently this guy's gene seed regressed a little bit. But When we have these kind of like big eyebrow ridges, this little thing, this nose, these cheeks right up here, this very, very, very pronounced sort of smile line, you want to push your highlights up. So we need to introduce a little bit more white or ivory, something near white, into your flesh tone mix and bring that up in like, and think of this in like almost a T, right? And then also, since this guy has such a pronounced cheekbone, probably a little bit at the top of the cheekbone too here. Same with the ear. Never forget. It's easy to forget ears. I always want to forget ears, but don't forget ears. So that's my kind of thoughts on the face. It's got nice, you got nice tones, nice colors, good variation. You need to push the contrast up higher, especially at your highlight points, like boom, 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 boom. Now, as to the rest of the mini, just to move through it quickly, with the hair, you want to work in some more sepia into that blonde, some darker colors. It looks rather flat and just kind of, you know, like it's stuck on his head right now. So we want to have some either stippling effects in there or little hashes in there or something in sepia tone to kind of show some variation. If you don't want to work on, if you don't want to do a technique like that, just even a simple sepia wash dragging toward the back. So it looks like the front is kind of raised and, you know, creating that look of like his skull is closer up or something, or the, you know, whatever the case. The armor itself, it feels kind of like our lead leg here. Like you've got some nice highlights down on this edge. Push this farther. Do what you did here, the rest of the Marine. Like this is nice. You've got these nice edges and light catches here and here and here and here. I like that. Where are they here? If light's coming down, it would be striking here as well. Same thing. This edge here, the edge of these little ventilation ridges. This edge, here, 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 right? All of these would be having the same treatment. So take what you did here and go all the way. Don't stop there. You got the right idea here. You know, so just keep going. Just keep going with that. And you're good to go. I get the sense you were trying to make like a shaft of light and show him that this is where the light is, because my highlight's from up here. You know, this is the lit area because the light's coming down. That's fine, but light is broader than that. Like unless this guy is literally in some kind of weird shaft of light, these same effects would also be happening in these other places too. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Them's my thoughts. Okay. Eric, taking us into Roddick's big old diorama with some bikers cruising across the wastes here.
Yeah. So he's saying kind of he's not totally happy with this. It's part of the get it done and something you know, I think he's been wanting to try, and I think for in terms of giving us grit, giving us a place, giving us the feel of this bombed outpost that they're coming to check on. I think you've put in the right elements to make that believable. I think a couple of the things that so I'm in the process of working on a diorama for Adepticon as a display board, etc. And the things I'm thinking about are also about how to make it feel like so one that the space they're in extends beyond the borders. So for instance, one of the things that from this angle, and there's a couple angles where I wasn't sure, but that trike in the middle, it's from some of these angles, it's hard to see how he got there, because it doesn't look like, not totally sure how he maneuvered into that spot on one hand. And then where are they going to go from here? What is the path leading out, or is there another trail? So kind of that idea that, you know, is that path in the front where they're going to go next? So maybe if that's the case, having, you know, some of that red soil or red dirt come down there. So you kind of, again, you're leading that the space that you're creating leads away from the board edges, as if it goes beyond, and it does not care as much for the board edges. The board edges are just framing this spot here. So there's just that aspect of give me more room for them to go. Where are they going from here? Have they just been plopped down? You know, and I think that's one of the things that I'm worried about when it comes to setting up the one I'm looking at, the display board, is it going to look like everything's just plopped here, or will it look like things exist beyond the borders of it? I'll say, because you've got these dark bikes, and and I think and then the space itself is really dark, or the earth is really dark. I think you want to pump up some contrast, and whether that means, my first impression was to take the dirt that they're on and brighten it up, make it either dustier so that they pop a little bit more, or make it more red, make it rustier, and brighter oranges, so that they kind of are stark and black on top of this very rusted out, or maybe it's some sort of chemical attack that was on here, and so there's use some weathering powder or something like that in, I don't know, in some straw or whatever, and blow it around so that it is everywhere, and they're kind of that would also create a cool opportunity for their tire treads to be going through something like that. And that's something that you could do even now. So if it's not something that you have to deconstruct everything to make that work. But lighten up the surface that they're driving on. And I think of like, could it be, I mean, it can be anything, right? This is sci fantasy. So, anything that you're thinking about, that colors that could contrast with the dark bikes and the dark armor. So those would really be the things that stood out to me in terms of a diorama, is how do you pop them against the surface that they're in, even in a semi unnatural kind of way, because war is not natural. So, how can you make that very evident that something came in here, blew it up, and left a mark? And then the other side is, give me some paths out of this box, and make it very clear how they are getting through it. If maybe you did, and it's just the angle on that trike, but roll him through and say, okay, how did he get here? And make sure that he could get in and get out. So maybe one of those things is like the guy in the back who's coming up over that ramp. Like if he's coming up hard and he's gonna jump over that, there's not a lot of place for him to go. Is he going really fast up that, or is he able to just kind of park at that angle? So I think it's a great way of adding levels, etc., and giving some different direction. Just think about kind of, I guess it's the path, right? Where did they come from and where are they going to, and make sure that we see that. Not that we just buy that they're where they're at, but that they've come from someplace and that they're going somewhere else. So those are my thoughts.
Very nice. Mm-hmm. All right, next up, Kieran brings out the orc.
Right. So Daniel Rachel's, I think this might be his first post to us, or at least to the end of the month, because I don't recognize the name from other bits. He did say that he's climbing back in after 5 or 6 years. So welcome, Daniel. Hopefully we have good things to offer, and that this invigorates you to keep hobbying it up. I also want to observe that he made mention that this kill team that's bringing him back at it. That seems to be doing that for lots of people. These little skirmish games that G-Dub has pumped out lately. So anyway, let's talk about this ridiculously unbalanced orc. He has gone for the supersized mega weapons in every case, and it makes for a very cool knob model. So what I want to say as a general observation to this whole thing is, you created a good, gritty, dark orc, and thank you for that, because sometimes people go a little bit too tidy with orcs, and this feels a whole lot more realistic for the world that this man lives in. Obviously, his weapons have come together through scavenging bits and pulling things off of other carcasses, very likely. So that rings true, and you're selling me that idea on here. So I appreciate that. However, as an overall thing that I want to say, I think that as you're getting back into painting and you've achieved something good here, across the board, one more step is all I'm going to generally ask in most of these things. One more step of highlight on the face and the knuckles and the high level muscle of these orcs. One more level of edge highlighting for the sharp points of the weapons, both on the metallic and on the red. And I think that gives something that's a little more sharp. It gives you a better delineation of surfaces to the next. One place that catches my eye, and I think it benefited from the most, in fact, Daniel, is that the grill that this guy has, his jaw piece, right? A sharp edge highlight on that would be good for now. I know that you wanted to add some grit and a little bit of battle damage on that thing. And that may be something you explore later on too, is where you have your painted metallic jaw piece or axe or gun that has metallic scrapes away from it. And that's something you might try out. You've sort of laid a bit of groundwork for that, of the scarring on the jaw piece and a few other places. The way to do that, you have to be real sharp with it though. You're going to have to, using just very little paint, but some good flow improver, have some light touches on some sharp edge points with the side of your brush, and that'll catch the very sharp edges and show a little bit of scraped away metal. But it has to be framed by a darker piece, which you've already done that part on a few places. So that's already halfway there. But think about it from those two perspectives, right? So just level one is one more layer of highlight all across the board on most of the surfaces, and then you can get creative with some more weathering and battle damage. I'm encouraged that you have the chops for it though, because maybe what viewers didn't notice at first, but I'll point out, is he's done this little skull and crossbones image on the fuel tank for this gun right here. And I think on the next frame, actually, we get a little bit better look at it, Vince, if you want to flip to that one. He's got one more frame for us to look at. Oh, no, actually, not at all. Never mind. That's the better look. But yeah, so paint control is okay. I think what you notice there is that the white got a little bit chalky, as it does when you try to paint directly over top of a much darker color. Don't worry too much about that for a small symbol, but if you're going to do larger surfaces areas and you're going to explore that a little bit better, you might just have to suck it up and do a few layers to get it to be sharp without being chalky. But good go of it so far. I do like the weathering you did on the sort of the shield guard of that flamer. You've made it all mucky and sooty. I think you could actually stipple in a little bit of brown in there, thinking about weathering and what that would look like. A little bit of rusty brown could go well if you stipple it into there. Not too heavy, but it'll give it a little bit more color interest as well. And I also want to leave you with one tiny thought about color composition, and that is this one blue hose, the one spot of blue on this entire model that kind of draws the eye towards it. And I would just suggest that that's a color that you don't need in there. If you wanted to do that hose, I'd maybe do it yellow like you did on this one on the underslung side. There's just no advantage to having blue in there when we look at it as a composition standpoint, Daniel. So think about that. I like what you've created here as an overall. I think I see some good habits are already developing, and hopefully as we progress over the next number of months, we'll see that from you, and hopefully each and every month we can offer you something a little bit to add to your arsenal. So welcome, and we'll grow with you.
Absolutely. All right. Let's see what we got next. All right. So next up, we've got a little bleep bloop. So why don't we all take a look at bleeps together? As tradition dictates, we all look at bleeps together. So let's do that. He's got his Guardian of Souls for us. He's going to have this full Nighthawk army done eventually. Gosh darn it. All right. And he says he took some of the feedback in on the contrast and such from the last time. And yep, he sure did. Like, I think this looks much Yeah, you definitely corrected on the issues from last time. So we had kind of talked. I want to jump back out to his comments real quick. He talked about incorporating the feedback from last month's PMP about making the tufts look more natural by painting them. And then also we had talked last month about the contrast. So the contrast looks smoothed out here in all the right ways. Like, it's in the right places. I like that he's drawn attention to the center of the face with it. It still has lots of dark spots. The tufts, you can tell. Like, look at the difference by adding that paint at the bottom, right? How much more integrated into the world it looks. It's such a minimal thing, but it makes such a big difference.
But it falls in line with his other style, which is what I think I like.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is looking at the robes from this guy, we start dark at the shoulders and ends up at white at the trailing edge of it.
Right.
And that's over a longer distance, but that kind of lighting effect feels more real when it's not the same, you know, and it's just a basic material. Some people might think, well, it's just a basic material. Who cares? But it actually, when you look at it as the overall picture, does make a big deal of difference.
Yeah, and I think the answer is we do. We care. But no, this guy is great. I think the only thing that stands out to me a little bit that I caught is why no center highlight line on the sword. That feels like it's missing. That is to say, why is there not a crisp edge line right here? Because it feels like that should exist. This is a pretty standard like punch sword that's you know a diamond shape, and this edge would collect light in some way, both from the top and bottom. So like there should be an edge line here. And then the rivets feel like they need more of a dark ring around them. They kind of are lit, but then they don't have any darkness around them, like right here and here. They would be casting some kind of small shadow. So like, you know, if we can dot those rivets with a deeper ink color, probably they should be about the color of like this area right here around the edge. That was the only thing that stood out to me.
Yeah, we always got to pick out a little bit.
Got to find something, man. Got to find something. Can't let you off easy.
Otherwise, we'll lose our badges.
Yeah, with this stunning level work, we got to find something.
Yeah. If we got nothing to say, then you know, we got no purpose.
That's right. But overall, another awesome submission.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. So Xavier's going to bring us some elves. So that's fine. I'll take those. The Sylvan, our Sylvan elves here, or whatever, our wanderers, or whatever we call these guys. I'll look at those. We've got some witch elves. If Eric, you want to take those.
Sure.
And then up here, we have a nice little Chaos Lord from Quarantin. If Kieran, you don't mind that. He talks about trying some non-metallic on the black armor and things like that. Mm-hmm. So that sounds fun. All right. So let's start with Xavier. Okay. So first thing I'll say, Xavier, is we got to get some more indirect lighting here. These guys are you've lit this quite brightly. But moving on from that issue. Yeah, I mean, overall, I like these guys. He had sort of a general question for how should I improve. So I'll give you a couple. We'll play this lightning round rapid fire. Here we go. Like overall, you've got some nice colors blocked in compositionally. You know, these are along in line with the elves that you did before. So that's fine. Like, I think color wise, you're in the right place and all that kind of stuff. Where we need to improve is in general across the board in our, say it with me, audience, tonal variation. So what I mean by that is your green looks really nice. You do a really good job with varying this green between the dark green and light green. Do that everywhere else where it's appropriate. Like the horse is so big and has so many muscles, and it's just a relatively flat tan color. One, I'd love to see the horses be different colors, you know, or have variations or spots or something that makes them all look like not clone horses of each other. Horses have, you know, if you look at like a flock of horses, that's what they're called, right? Flocks. If you look at a flock of horses, a murder of horses, there's no two that are the exact same color. right? They all have like slight variations or slightly different pattern or whatever. Even horses that are like jet black, you can still see small variations in like the blackness or their socks, the color of their socks, and that kind of stuff. So bring some of that to the fore. And even if you want to keep them all the same tone because you want to keep it aligned, it's fine. Then just give me some more shading and variation, or do some texture on the horses or stuff like that, where you like hash in there, the fur for like really, really to show that look, to make this not look like smooth. Right now, they look like they're made of like kind of porcelain, right? The next item is the metal. Got some nice shading up here. Could probably take that a little darker here, here, but you're going the right direction with the shading. So overall, I like that. The light blue pop color looks really nice. The skin tone on the elves needs a little more variation. It feels it's pale. I understand you were going for like pale elves, but I would go for a little more variation in it. You want to kind of catch some different red hues and stuff like that in there. Finally, on the fur on their back, all this looks very similar. So same story. Nature is random. Nature is organic. Nature isn't uniform, yet every wolf pelt here is uniform, like they bought it from the wolf pelt store. I would expect to see different colors to their pelts and slight variations in patterning. So, run like a dark black line here that then has white on the side and then goes to brown. And then over here you do, reverse it in some way and so on and so forth. You can keep it all in the same neutral tones, just kind of do different patterning and stuff like that with it. So them's all my thoughts. Overall, good stuff. These guys, it's a very beautiful, striking army you're putting together here. I do like your color choices very much. Okay, Ryan Easterling bringing us some daughters.
So Ryan's goal is to put down this army pretty fast using washes to try and achieve a very fast paint scheme, and he's asking for some kind of help on the basing, etc. Adding and I think we might have some people around here who have an opinion on those sorts of things.
Oh, cool. Who?
So I think I think it is a great achievement in a lot of the technical the shades, etc., to be able to do likely what's happening is you've base coated or primed them in white, and then you're using some of the shades to give that distinction. So flesh wash or a sepia wash for the skin. I don't know what the green wash is, but something like that for the hair. And I think that so far you're enjoying the colors, and I think you're right too. I mean, I think there's some really cool colors coming out of this. I'm not as familiar with this. I know Mingo Miniatures Tyler has a nice tutorial on using washes to do that. I think Vince, you've put out some videos on that. Where I think you're achieving. I mean, one thing I like on the table, I do not have a problem with kind of that table standard, get it on the table. And in this case, the washes do add a lot of dimension to it in sometimes very subtle ways, sometimes in very distinct ways. I think you do suffer with this. You've got to be careful not to get as much pooling as you do in some cases. So for instance, the girl on the left, her clavicle has quite a bit of wash, and her belt looks like it has a lot of wash resting in those spots. The sorceress or whatever with her hand out in the front looks like her elbow pit has quite a bit of wash, or maybe that's a bracelet or something there, but it looks like there's just a big chunk of wash hanging out there. So I think you do if you're doing this, it's certainly quicker, but you do have to manage it. And I think in some cases, in case of the green hair, it looks like it's applying its pigment kind of unevenly. So for instance, the sorceress, her hair actually looks like it's got quite a bit of depth, and gets some intense greens near the kind of the side that's closest to us. But the girl on the far left, her hair looks like it's not catching as much pigment, and so there's maybe needing to strategically apply a second level of wash in certain areas. So, for instance, the girl on the left, that you'd apply some more wash down at the bottommost part of her hair, so the top of her hair, but where it goes to its lowest point, that there'd be another application of wash there or glaze there or something to kind of darken that up, because it's going to be more in shadow, less likely to be as white or as pastel as what we're getting. Now, part of this is tough too then when you've got the leggings are a very flat color. It doesn't seem like maybe you've not used a wash there, or maybe you have used one of the new technical paints, but it does feel like the leggings do need a highlight. And if you are not looking to highlight the skin, the hair, etc., if you're not looking for that kind of step, then I think you may have to look at something else for the leggings, just because they're so dark. And I'm getting, while I have the silhouette of the leg, I'm not getting any of the detail or kind of feel of that. So you might want to look. I think it works well with the green in terms of coloring, but because it's just flat, there's not enough room for me to see the shade and the shadows naturally from the sculpt. So those are a couple of things that I would think about, is just manage your wash a little more carefully, make sure it doesn't pool, and in some cases you may need to apply it strategically so that so some of those darker areas get more attention. And so it's not just a one shot and go. You still need to put a little of attention to it. And then the leggings may be a different color so that you can wash them. Maybe even if those are agrax, then they're going to be like a leathery brown, etc. For the basing, you're specifically asking, kind of what kind of grass to put in there, etc. I think you could certainly get away with some red or green brush. I mean, those are the colors that you're playing with in the models themselves, and you want something that maybe contrasts from the earth a little bit and makes sense. And you're going to want to vary that a lot. I think red would be interesting in terms of these ladies like to spill blood, so maybe there's that, and you could put some blood for the blood god down in the crevices and cracks underneath them. But I think you should also think about, one of I'm doing some mountainous region, and I think there's still going to, branches around, and I'm using lichen in small pieces as they look like sticks and that have, sat there a while and even hollowed out a bit. And those come in all different shades, and they can be shaded. So you could get the white lichen and you could shade it whatever color you want, just like you are doing with the models. So things like that could add some visual interest. They break it up. It creates some straight lines amidst all that organic rockiness, etc. So those are my thoughts. If anybody else has any thoughts on going straight, using shades primarily to do a quick paint job, if there's any one tip you have, by all means.
No, I think you covered really the most important one, which is when you do it, you've really gotta like be careful, right? You can't let it pool. A nice even application over the whole thing. It's better to glaze it to use the wash twice, right? Because you didn't get enough coverage the first time, than it is to try to nail it all once. Also, look at mixing washes. You can still do that relatively fast. Like, you're clearly using a CP on the skin. It'd be nice if you had some Reichland in some place, and around their eyes, and in the deeper places, you then mix in a little Karienberg Crimson, or even the what's the purple one called? Drucci Violet. That's what it's called.
The purple one.
The purple one. Yeah. Around their eyes and their mouth, and in the deep recesses in between their legs by the tabard, or under their armpits, don't be afraid to apply a couple different washes. You can do it while they're still wet and drying. You just start mixing the washes together. In fact, it's better that way. As long as you're applying them thinly and they're not pooling, then you'll get this nice variation in the shadows and the shades.
Yeah. I wanted to add on something that Eric said, that lichen can be bought in all kinds of colors too. I've seen them do a mix of autumn color tones, so yellows and oranges. They're certainly available that way.
Yep, I would hit up Gamer's Grass. That would be my very strong recommendation. I have a review of it on my channel. I really like the stuff they have. They also have some very exotic stuff, like they have red and blue and purple plants. So if you want to go, with like some kind of otherworldly stuff, you could do that too. I wouldn't recommend blue or purple in this case, but my point is maybe like the red ones work, some red bushes or red flowers.
Something intense could be really good.
Yeah. All right. Merry holiday season. Okay, here we go. Our Chose Lord.
Right. Okay, well, he's done a sort of a composite photo here.
Which we love.
Which we do love, because we can look at a lot of different things at once without flipping through, and everybody can spend their time. Now, he pointedly asked a few specific things, which we also love, by the way. If you ask for specific feedback of things you tried and things that he wants a direct advice about. So, Quinton, here we go. So the first thing you talked about is doing sort of a non-metallic effect on the black armor of this guy. So let's talk about that first off. So I think I'm fine, as you said, with the placement. You've chosen this light attack point that sort of comes from down the gun barrel almost. And you can see, I think the best one to look at as I'm talking about this is the one that's top center, where Vince's cursor is hovering right now on that particular frame. But let's start by looking at the guns. So if you go to the gun barrel, then you have a light catch that's on the top of that, and it casts up under the shoulder pad. It goes across to the back trailing arm and leads up that line. And then you also have it catching on the feet. If you look at the side angle, so the upper left of your screen, it comes across the thigh piece as well. So I think that's great. I think you've picked out the positioning of where those light catches would appear in a perfectly fine way. Now, to comment about it, you're dealing with lots of cylinders and conical shapes within this model, mostly cylinders. So when you do that, you have generally one main light catch on a cylinder, and then as it sort of bounces and has a secondary reflection on a different point on one or two other points. So when we look at the gun casing, he's chosen both of those light catches to be roughly equal in intensity. And I think that that's almost nailing it. If I was to suggest otherwise, I think the one that's on the sort of lower side of that gun casing would be a little bit narrower than the primary one that's following the length of the gun barrel. The other place that you could catch a bit of a more secondary intensity is there's sort of a vent hole that's carved in there. And I think the bottom side of that could catch a little bit more light as well. So that's one place that you could do things. Moving up to the shoulder pad, I think on that shoulder pad, because it's a rounded shape, this is a big challenge to do. And it's a very big challenge to do smoothly, of course. And because it's a conical shape, or your light catch rather, would be a conical shape. So you can widen it out a little bit more at the top, but still need to have a band of absolute darkness where it meets with the fur cloak that's draped over top of it, because that's going to shade a little bit of the direct light from hitting it on the very top. And so because you asked about other places where those light catches could happen, I don't see any other places that I am not satisfied with how that goes. I was trying to get a look at the upper inside of the gauntlet, and it's probably only this lower left frame that we get a direct look at it. I maybe feel that because of the directionality of the light, that one band that you have, and probably better seen from the center bottom frame, could probably shift over the top a little bit. So it could shift a couple millimeters over to the left of where you have that. So specifically for those watching at home, I'm looking at the gauntlet that's holding the helmet. And what I'm saying is that cylindrical light band catch, I think, will probably just roll over a couple of millimeters towards the top rather than the side where it's at right now. Now, the next thing we got to talk about is how this black armor and the way that the light catches have happened carry over onto the other metallic aspects that you've done here. So we've got two things to contend with. We have some silver, of course, on gun barrels and a few other places, chainmail, etc., etc. And then we have predominantly the thing that we all know is famous for chaos armor is all this intricate framing around each armor plate that's done in gold here. So the simple task is the hot light catch on this gun barrel should follow directly the line of what you've told me is the hottest light catch on the black armor. So rather than have it shift over to the side where you could have a secondary light catch, the primary one has to be directly on the top. So again, looking at the frame that's in the very center top side, that gun barrel right there on the very top, that has to be the light catch, and the most intensity should be towards the front of it. Whereas if you shift your eyes and look again to the frames that are on the left side of your screen right now, both the top and bottom, his most intense light catch is actually just a little above the center of the side angle. So that should be a narrower light catch than what's on the direct top. So those are my observations about light catches there. Now, coming back to the top center frame for a minute, and let's start to look at how he's applied the gold. Okay, so again, he has used a silver as his absolute highlight on this metallic gold. And that's fine to do in this case. And in most cases, it still follows the same lines as what he's done on the black. So I'm happy about that. That's perfectly fine. The thing that's lacking overall on this gold stuff is the shadow. It has to go down to, you know, in some places when you're using metallic, you need a very bronze color, or even darker than bronze. Like I for myself, I use some Vallejo line stuff, and we're talking about things that have a bit more of a reddish tint to the metallic. I use one that's brilliantly named Tinny Tin, for example, but it has a lot of red in it, but it is a fair bit darker. If you look at it not in the light, it actually looks like a deep chocolate brown almost, if it didn't have metallic pigment in it. And I think that that's the overall feeling that I have about the gold on this Quarantine, is that the shadow needs to be just as strong as the highlight. Around all these rivets especially is a case where that can catch. And then if you can, and that collar around the center of his, the center of his head, the collar that rings, should be mostly dark. And for a lot of reasons, there should really only be some really tiny light catches on there, because his cloak is shadowing a lot of light from getting at that space, and his chin and head and his headdress, the other spaces. So do think about that. You need to not intensify the highlights on those things, but intensify the shadows all across the board on the gold. So that's a lot to think about. And it's a real good study of light. So I think I'll leave it at that for talking about the metallics and how the gold happens, as well as the silver. But there was one last thing that Quarantine asked us to talk about on here, and that is that he was trying to do a sort of a hot, intense, sort of real active glow going on both the power fist and the power cables. So here's a couple things I'd say about that. Starting okay is the first thing I'd say. You got the right idea that you should be sort of traveling from a reddish to an absolute white. But here's what I might suggest is to fall in line with how you've done the metallic and you're sort of drawing lines up the length of it, why not do that light intensity in the same way? So rather than just the fingertips being the hottest part, what if that ran the length of the fingers? What if that ran the length of the back of the hand? So that it wasn't just the tip of the finger that was yellow and moving into white, but it was the center of the finger running the length of it. I think that might sell the idea a little bit better. Similarly, that's what you do on that power coil that's on the gauntlet just below, which you've started to do, but you just need to pick a space where you're going to go into almost white on that, and you can bring it into, a brighter yellow and into a white. We've probably seen this kind of thing more commonly on blue power coils that are done for plasma guns for a lot of Space Marine stuff. So take a look at how that part is done, and keep the center of your coil as your whitest spot, and give that a try. And then if you like the idea of the intensity of your claw running the length of it, I think that that's something worth exploring, and you can stretch it down there so that the lines are flowing in the same way that your lines are flowing on that black armor. There's a bunch of stuff. I've talked for a few minutes here. That's lots to think about quarantine. I hope that you can take those things away on an otherwise well-composed model. Otherwise, I didn't really talk much about that, but let's maybe finish off by that. It feels very real in the environment that he's in. The basing has some good interest on it, with green matching up against the other choice of this guy's chosen, I guess, Dark Angel enemies. So you got some green matching up there, and the triangulation is fine. But otherwise, good execution on most of the rest of it. But I'll leave you with those 3 thoughts that hopefully you can implement. Anything else you gents want to add before we move away?
Nothing else for me. All good
Okay.
thoughts.
Good.
All right. So let's see. We got Tebow. I'll get there. Brings us a horticulus Slimux.
Your French is really just about as good as your Nurgle language.
It's pretty similar, yes. And then Alan Thomas has some vehicular work for us, and Fred Mulvaney, speaking of Dark Angels, has some Dark Angels for us. So there you go. All right. So let's see. Eric, do you want to take Horticulus? And then I would love to take the vehicle if Kieran, you want to take the Dark Angel, since you just took somebody killing Dark Angels. Is that fair?
That seems like a good transition, yeah.
All right. Okay. So let's start with Horticulus.
All right, let's see here. Let me see if there's any hopes and dreams here. I didn't push anything, so I know I could have improved many transitions. The aim was to achieve an original color scheme for the snail, but I feel I didn't think about it enough and struggled to balance the piece in the end. Any advice of other color placement I could have done, or general color choice, contrast feedback? All right, so what I really enjoyed at first blush was that I feel like I'm in a subterranean space and there's some bioluminescence going on. So I think that some of it is, in my impression is that we don't have intense lighting on this. And your photography but there's enough lighting here. Your photography got really clean shot of this. And so where we do have quite a bit of contrast, I do think you've achieved something, semi-unique with the slug or the snail body, with the pinks and the greens. Again, one of my favorite Nerval combinations is that watermelon feel. And so I think you've done really good there. Is it the most unique? I've not seen the snail in these colors, but like I said, I think that's common in Nurgle. But I think you've done a great job. I see lots of darks and lights, even within, the skin on those flat surfaces, down in the recesses, underneath the shell, etc. So I think you do a great job there. The skin and everything looks really good. the shell itself has quite a bit of ridging, and you are touching it in the most delicate way. You're not putting a ton of highlights or layers to build up, and you're going right to something really stark, which again I think can work really well here. And I think it again plays to the idea of bioluminescence. If there was some sort of like the tips of this shell have a slightly different material that when dark those light up, and you just have this very pinpoint shell kind of pattern, I think works really well for this. And I think you could maybe, like you said, and you admitted, you could push these farther. I think you should push them farther. There's a lot you can do to, even in this sort of shell, if you were to, obviously those little pinpoint tips, especially close to the center, those are obvious. Yes, put a dot there. But what if you went in, I don't know, a millimeter, 2 millimeters, and you put another dot, and you kept that pattern going all the way around. And so you kind of creating your own pattern inside the shell, I think would create uniqueness that would stand out and other people would take notice of. You did a great job with non-metallic metal on the blade that he has, which is interesting. I always think of that as more of an organic thing, but I really like it in that blade formation. I mean, why couldn't Nurgle form, very organic looking metal? And I think, Horticulus himself has, again, very good skin tones, very good contrast, even in that kind of small space. Where I think I'm feeling that it's not enough contrast or it's too dark is in the things like the bone on his antlers and the tree that's growing and the twig that's holding up the Nurgling. Now, again, maybe these look darker because the lighting and the photography, but because everything else is reading really well, I'm just gonna assume that maybe these are just too dark and they should go another direction. In terms of color palette, I mean, you've got kind of your three main colors. You've got your reddish, pinkish purple. You've got your greenish and greenish yellow, and then you've got the blue, and then the brown kind of fits with the yellows, etc. I think the purple that he is sitting on is probably too far afield. It's starting to go a different color. I think I don't know if that could be better off kind of similar pinkish color to the snail's top of their body, and it would contrast well with Horticulus's body being more of the green. And I think that pink, part of me thinks that pinkish color just needs to be in a few more places. The green is traveled around in the Nurgling and in Horticulus. The blue is traveling around in the metallic, and then in the shell, and that plant in the back. But maybe that plant in the back needs to be this pinkish watermelon color as well. And then, I think that other than that, I think the branches need to lighten up a bit. I mean, come on, why so serious? But other than that, I think there's fantastic colors here. I'm surprised at how much contrast and the tones that you have here. It feels like it's an underexposed photo, but everything is still so clear, and I can see the contrast. So I think that that's a testament to the paint that you've done and the contrast that you have achieved. So kudos. Great piece.
Yeah, I got to say, this is maybe one of my favorite color schemes I've seen on a Nurgle model. It does feel, very creative, very different, very emotional. Like, it has a really great environmental ambiance to it. I agree with you on the cave statement, right? Yeah. Also, you did say the blues travel around really nice, and I want the audience to appreciate how hard it was for me not to bust in and make a John Popper joke. So I really, really held myself back there.
I'm disappointed in you for not.
Well, the hook will bring you back every time. So there we go. All right. So next up, we've got some Dark Angels.
Righto. Well, the couple things that Fred makes mention of in here is that he challenged himself to try to do the armor with just airbrush. And so that's what we're going to spend our time talking about a little bit. He also did some eye glow as well. So he's got a blue eye glow coming out of there. But let's talk about the armor first. I think first off, I would say fun, right? Hey, Fred, when you can pull out the airbrush and you can start to get control of that to make sure that you got individual panels pulled off and you're casting highlights on there. If this is your first go at it, I think that's turned out okay. I think as you do more, you'll get better and you'll get more accurate with that kind of stuff. Not that I think that this is, I'm not suggesting that this is real messy, but there is some places when we flip around and look at some backside frames, if you would, Vince, where it's not consistent all the way through. Like for instance, this heavy weapon guy, he has his light carry around the back and deep down the backpack, whereas the two guys to the right of him, that doesn't carry down as far and catch on those spaces. And then the back of the shoulder pads of a couple of them is similar. Again, that's a little bit nitpicky, so I don't want to harken on it too much. But I think what it illustrates, Fred, is that as wonderful as the airbrush tool is and can do some great things about these soft kind of transitions on round surfaces like Space Marines, it's really good for it. But it can't be entirely done unless you're a super expert without some concert with the brush. So the couple things that I would suggest, and actually somebody else beat me to it with the comments earlier in the month, is a little bit of lining with a darker color to delineate those things, especially the shoulder pads. If we look at side view, if you would, those kinds of things can be sharpened up. And similarly, doing some absolute edge highlights, I think, would still be necessary, Fred, to make this really look sharp. Okay, in the similar places that you've done your other Space Marines in the past, you know what I mean, where the light catches on the front edges. I think that's necessary to bring the whole package together, and not just the airbrush alone. But the airbrush probably saved you a whole bunch of time in trying to do, blends on rounded surfaces like those bulbs on these goddamn shoulder pads of these guys, as well as on the backpacks. Those are tough to get smooth in any other way. So I think you've employed the airbrush well to get that part of it done. Now, the other thing you want to talk about was the light glow from which you've used out of the eye visors as well as on the plasma guns. I think I like the stuff in the eye visor because you still have a sharp point of white in the very center of it. We talked about it, earlier, even in this same session, about doing eyes and keeping the center of it your brightest point and casting it out a little bit over there. The sort of next level thing to think about and how blue and dark green interact, though, is that it would probably still cast some blue, but it'd probably be a bit darker blue because of the way that those two colors interact. They're a little bit beside each other on the color wheel, but that way it kind of flattens itself out. The other thing that I would suggest is there's one shot that we have of this heavy plasma gun where from this angle here, it looks really good on the front, but it looks a little bit too hard and harsh in the center of the plasma coils on that one. So I think that white intensity, although in the center of it, should still maintain its white intensity. But on your pistol and your other handheld gun, it's sort of a little bit softer as it transitions away, instead of, whereas this one looks like a hard band of white and then switches to a much cooler blue almost immediately. I don't know if you did that one with the airbrush. I would suspect you maybe didn't, because of the line of it appears to be a little bit hard. But that could certainly soften up, I think. Otherwise, what else do I like about this? I like that you have thought about composition on these models. You have red sort of troop symbols on the one shoulder pad and found other places to apply red on the models. The chainsword of the sergeant, for example, the little flowers that you put onto the bases. I think that is great to think about that compositionally. Those red Troop symbols, though, I think could use some more depth of color as well. You'll have to get back in there with the brush, do that edge highlight. You got a curved surface, so you got to think about doing a little bit of a highlight and shade transition on that too, to make it sort of fall in line with the rest of the armor and how it's done. But I think those are the key points that I would bring up. And again, I just want to circle back to the idea that as great as the airbrush is to help you with those really tough curved surfaces and highlighting those, it still needs the brush to come back in and do that final touch to really define this armor and give it some sharpness. Yeah, so those are my thoughts about that. Keep on experimenting with that airbrush and you'll become a master.
Absolutely agreed. Practice is you got to get the tool, you got to feel it down, you got to get the full use of that dual action. Also, I have a recent video on doing plasma coils that will show a lot of what Kieran was talking about, so you may want to check that out. Okay. All right, so Alan Thomas brings us a big vehicle. Here's his questions. How much to panel modulate? It's black and has nothing but very long flat edges, so it felt weird on the wings. It's under modulated, but should it be just on the upper panels? Blah, blah, blah. Okay. So the glow effect on the runes didn't work, clearly, since this is black. Okay. And then the OSL on the base is bad. Okay. All right. So, okay. Fair enough. Let's find out. Okay. So we got our big old plane here. Let's see. Where's a good angle where we can get top down? There we go. That's nice. That shows us the panels. Okay. So question the first. How much to panel modulate? On black vehicles, generally very little. Panel modulation works well with colors, I guess. And black is not a color. It is the absence of color. Black things will tend to be pretty black overall. And this is why I don't like black vehicles in general, because you lose a lot of your ability to do interesting things with them, because the black lining doesn't show up as much and stuff like that. So that could be a personal taste thing. But I find them to be much more visually uninteresting, because you don't have those opportunities. Now, you did do a nice job here with your panel edging. So I think that's good. If you wanted to do a little bit of panel modulation, you would just need to go into the subtlest of black grays. So the other answer to your question is very, 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 very little if you're going to do it. Okay. Because otherwise it will stop looking like black, instantly. You could also do things like, instead of panel modulating, you could do a more traditional highlighting scheme, like having the, upper edges here in a lighter gray color, or the lower plates here in an upper gray, in a lighter gray color. The bottom of these plates showing a light it would naturally be slightly lighter here at the bottom than here at the top. So you can play with some near gray blacks to really, you want to push this into a super black at the top ridge here where it would be most enshadowed. You can play with that kind of stuff with the angles. It's your light catch would generally be light will be brighter here than up here and brighter here than up here. If you're going to modulate it, I do directional modulation like that, as opposed to true traditional panel modulation, where you're kind of keeping the centers, more bright. Okay. So that's my answer to that one. Overall, I think the black is honestly not a problem. It's fine. I think your black is fine. I'm not sure I would do much, if anything, with it. Your other two questions, I'm sorry, I forgot them. The glow effect on the runes didn't work. Okay. On the runes. Oh, down here. Okay. Okay. And then the OSL, increase price, right? I mean, like separate the ridge, so that help. Okay. Got it. All right. So, So let's talk about doing glowing runes. Picture. I assume he means these runes right here. Okay. So glowing runes. If you're doing this with an airbrush, if you have an airbrush, here's the easiest way to do glowing runes. Paint your white rune. Go in with your airbrush and very lightly in white, very lightly, lighter than that. Nope, still lighter. Nope, lighter. There you go. Okay. You want to create a little soft fuzz around each rune. You just kind of point at the center of the rune and you kind of rotate your brush like that, just a little. Point at the center of the rune, rotate your brush a little. And again, right? Then what you do is you take a color, whatever you were aiming at doing, blue, I don't know, something. And then you then glaze over the whole shooting match here, okay? And then you come back in with like white blue and you retrace your rune. You retrace your rune. Then you take pure white, and at the corners where multiple sections touch, you take those to pure white. That's your quick and easy, like quick and fast glowing runes. It's simple, easy breezy cover girl. Okay. So if you don't have an airbrush and you're forced to do this initial thing with a glaze, then yes, this gets tougher, right? Because you need to do a pretty smooth glaze with like a near white. And whites break down very easy. They get chalky really easy. But yes, you would do the glaze first, and then you would glaze the color over top, and then the other things I said. Okay. Now, as to the red glowing, I don't know that we really have a shot that shows the base super well. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we have a picture that shows the little lights on the base.
Just got a distance shot here, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, looking at him, it's kind of hard to read. I don't think this is bad. I think you're fine. Like, it feels pretty right. Like, I think what you're aiming at is you went for like a rotating police light where you have a bright spot here and then it goes to dark. I think that could be a good trick with this instead of really worrying about OSL. Yeah, because it looks like you have your bright spot here and then it's casting a red out. Like, I think that's what you're going for. The problem is that you used a thin wash and it collected down in the recesses. That's what, okay, I see what's going on now. Yes. So you lit both the sides. You're making triangles like police lights, but then you use like a thin wash. The problem with that is that it flowed into the recesses, and light wouldn't capture in the recesses, right? It's exactly where it wouldn't be, as a matter of fact. What would happen is it would edge each of these tiles. Like, you'd have a brightest edge here where the light hits the edge of the tile and fades over the course of the tile. And then each, like, you can do it like this, just go back and then you got to re-blackline all your tiles here, right? Because it wouldn't be capturing on these recessed areas. Moreover, it still feels like it's like, it's sort of inconsistent in how it's applied. Like, basically, if this were being here, this area would be somewhat decent red. I mean, red's not going to show on black greatly, right? Like, hold up a candle to something that's pure black, you don't get much light back, right? Because black absorbs all color. It is the absence of color because it absorbs everything. That's why it's black. It does not reflect light. Now, that's perfect black. We don't live in a universe where perfect black exists, right? We live in a universe full of like near blacks that are blues and browns. So there is light pollution and color will reflect somewhat. But it would still be weak. But the brightest point of it would be here. And then by this area here, I mean, there would be almost nothing. You know, you have the faintest of red touched into the, basically just you'd want to catch just the edges of the squares. Or like here on the grating, you'd be catching the edges of the grates, where it's just like little tiny, you know, light points at the sharpest reflection where the light can gather. Okay. So that's my thought on that. Overall, I think this is really solid. You got a nice improvement. I like the little weathering around the edges. Your freehand game is I want to comment on this. Like, yeah, you want a little bit of these, that's a little squidgy. Go back with your red, clean that up. Like, a lot of people when they try freehand, they think, oh, I've got to write this really carefully. And then they write it and they're like, okay, I wrote it, I'm done. No, there is a second step to freehand, and it's called the cleanup phase. Like, go back in with your original red and trace the edge, sharpen this stuff out, right? But this stuff is great in here. Like, this looks really good. I like this. You balanced out your letters pretty nice. Good. By fire, be purged. Pretty sweet. I dig that. Your number 3 up here, it's looking great. This thing, this Angel's Mercy, that looks really nice. Like, all the little freehand touches look really good. And then finally, you did a great job with the glass. Just want to comment on that before we leave. Like, that's an easy thing to miss. I think it's really, really nice. His lenses and the glass here, the sort of cockpit glass, I think that looks really great. So that looks absolutely wonderful. Very well done on there. Really nice. Like, vehicles don't have faces, you know, because they're vehicles, unless they're Knight Titans, which is why I like Knight Titans, because they still have faces. But this thing doesn't have a face, but you want something to draw the attention to the center of the model in the same way. You want that central point of visual interest. And you did that by creating the nice, bright, reflective lenses here in blue, and then this cockpit, and it looks wonderful. So really, really well done on that. I love that. And Russ lives. So there you go.
Yeah, that's a great piece for sure.
Yeah, super cool. Okay. And that brings us to the end of the month.
Lovely.
Wow. So it'll be
the end of the year.
The end of the year. That's right. That brings us that 2018 to a close. Wouldn't it be hilarious if I turned on you and said, gentlemen, what was your favorite model of the year?
Oh, snap.
Gotcha.
I would have to take a second to scroll back,
Right.
but I could come up with an answer.
I'll
Sure.
tell you in 2020.
Sure. No, in all fairness, what do you have? We are now to the section of the show where we give our hot pick of the month. Hot pick of the month. So going back to the beginning of December. Now, obviously, you're starting a little cold on this, right? Because you, Kieran, you weren't here as much for the original one. Got any picks?
Oh, sure I do.
All right.
I really enjoyed the creativity and the reach that Avid Lang did with his Nagash model.
Oh.
It is a great one. It is really good.
His depicted scene on that cloak, and even on even on his headdress, I was really, really keen on that. Looking closer, I see that he even did some arcane scriptures on the books that really pulled through and looked sharp. In addition to all that, so yeah, big stretch. You know, we talk about painting bravely and that kind of terminology, and he certainly did. So big kudos to him for that.
Yep. All right, Eric, your pick.
Man, now I got to pick. So that was definitely where I was looking, but Tam the Third's Lord Celestant? No.
Castellant.
Castellant. I really liked the richness in there, and the lights and the darks and all that kind of stuff. So I think that one stood out for me.
Nice. Yeah, it's really good. I like that one too. This was a great month. I love both of those picks.
We should pick more because there was actually
there was some really this is such a strong month. So I'll do it like this. I want to give some honorable mentions. Emile Nystrom for the wonderful elf, such great rich tones in it, just so wonderfully high elfy, colorful. Like I really did like that. Harlem Bad Dunkers wonderful diorama scene, like super evocative. Like cool, really was a cool classic D&D scene. You know what I mean? I was like, oh yeah, I've played that adventure. You know what I mean? Bleep bloop, as always, killing it, just killing it. But you know, I think I've got to give my favorite this month to TD McDonald. I love the Chaos Death Watch, man. I love Heresy, and I love the way that he made all those Death Watch members. Like, I love the dark reflection of the Death Watch concept into Chaos. It was well executed. Colors were varied and beautiful, but it still all hung together compositionally. It was super fun. I love everything about it.
Nice.
Yeah, all good choice. I also want to. We can't leave without giving big props to Thibaut Rayom for his Horticulus.
Oh yeah, certainly. Yeah, that big. I could see myself picking that, and it's a Nurgle model. That should tell you how good that is.
Nice.
So well done, whole PMP community, for ending the year so strong.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
We had 12 months worth of goodness, but certainly we'll remember these ones because they're the most fresh in our mind. Great stuff, though.
I agree. So that, well, gentlemen, that brings us to the end of the year, and now we roll into 2019. This will be the year where the PMP moves somewhere. We'll figure that out when the time comes. But for now, we're going to keep on keeping on. And as always, and as I always say, what makes this community great, we love doing this every month. We have a lot of fun with this, but we are the minor part of this. The real heroes of this community are the people who are commenting on the posts, giving feedback, answering questions, constructive criticism, everything. every single day, every post. And that is what makes this community great. I see so much positivity, so much knowledge sharing. I want to thank everybody for an incredible year for 2018 in the PMP. This was our greatest year ever by far. I've seen so many pieces that blew my mind in what they achieved. I've seen so many people paint bravely and really try new things. I've seen so many first-time people come and share with us and post with us and put themselves out there, which is wonderful. I've seen people on like their 5th model that blows my mind, right, of how much they're doing and how well they're doing. That is incredible to see. As a community, I couldn't be more happy with this at the end of 2018. It's a community of rock stars, and I am lucky. I count myself blessed and honored every day to be a member of it. So thank you, everyone, for an incredible year.
You know, on that tip, Vince, I hope you guys don't mind. I'm going to go a little bit off script here.
No, please.
I'm actually going to boldly say that I want to show some appreciation for who I think is the PMP contributor of the year. And what I mean by that is not necessarily the person who contributed the most stuff or painted the most things, but the one who has been the most active in giving feedback, giving help, encouragement, and building up the community by all of her offerings that she shares with so many of our members. And that's Bethany Graham. I want to give big props to Bethany Graham for all the effort that she puts and the attention she gives to the entire encompassment of our community. So thank you, Bethany, if you're listening. Those are my closing thoughts for this year. Is you've been one of the greatest assets of this community, and we're so glad to have you.
You know, here's how I know that's absolutely true. Because as you were talking before you said the name, I knew who you were talking about. And I would have said the same name.
Agreed.
Right? Like, absolutely. Bethany, you're a rock star. And we didn't do an awards thing this year. Kieran and I have talked about doing it like the Oscars, where we wait till the year is completely closed out. And I think we'd like to do that for just the PMP here in 2019. So we'll talk about what that looks like. But you just clicked in my mind that I don't want to do it. And I hadn't thought about this, but I don't want to do it for just, the pieces. Certainly that's an important part of it, right? But I want to recognize the community itself as well. The people who are doing that. We talk about it every show. I want to make it real. And I completely agree. So to everybody who's commenting, and yes, I agree. Bethany, absolute rock star, pillar of this community. So thank you. Great shout out, Kieran.
Yep.
All right, gentlemen, any closing thoughts as we leave 2018 in the rear view?
Those were my closing thoughts.
Very good. No, those are good closing. Those were really solid closing thoughts.
Mine is it's 2019. Let's kick 2018's ass.
I don't know a stronger note to end on. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, everybody. We certainly appreciate it. We look forward to another great month, another great year. We'll see you next time.